Chapter 139. Mag looked at the aggrieved Vicenio, and suddenly felt a little sympathetic. It seemed like this man didn't become like this because he was a womanizer, but because he had a fierce wife. That was why he was in such a state. What kind of woman was she? Sir, what kind of medicine are you talking about? We don't sell medicine in our restaurant. Yarbemia looked at Vicenio in confusion, and her expression was quite serious. She didn't know why this customer knelt before Meg as soon as they met, but if he wanted to frame the restaurant, she would be the first to disagree. Meg and Vicenio looked at Yarbemia at the same time. This girl is so innocent, but it's not good to explain this to a little girl. They looked at each other and chose to ignore it. Dear customer, please get up first. I guarantee on the reputation of the restaurant that there will be no problem with every serving of food sold from the restaurant, and there will be no situation of selling medicine in public. Mag reached out and helped Vicenio up. He looked at him seriously, and said, "It's just that every dish has its own unique effect. A ruggiamo early in the morning can really make people excited, and make them more energetic and motivated to work. But it's a different story if you don't have any other work to do." Vicenio's hands trembled. His wife didn't have any other job, and her job was to squeeze him dry every day. However, he couldn't refute Mag's statement. After all, so many people had bought ruggiamos in the morning and left energetically after eating, and they were all in good condition. The most exaggerated ones were probably those demons who were on fire after eating the ruggiamos, but none of them had any strange symptoms. It seems that I can't let her eat ruggiamo in bed anymore. Vicenio sighed silently. After thinking for a while, he looked at Meg with shining eyes and asked, "By the way, Mr. Mac, you said that every dish has its own characteristics. What are the characteristics of the young Jew fried rice in your restaurant and the new dish you're releasing today?" The young Jew fried rice can promote blood circulation and nourish the body. It's good for people who are weak. Meg looked at Vicenio and paused for a while, then continued, "I'm not sure about the characteristics of the new tofu pudding yet, but it should be good for the skin. Female customers will like it." Meg's pause made Vicenio feel a little embarrassed, but he was still quite excited. He had been looking for something that could nourish his blood and chi, but those things were often harmful to the body. Half of the reason why his body was like this was because of those messy medicines. Now that he heard Mag say that young Jew fried rice could nourish his body, of course he was excited. He had been craving ruggiamo when he saw his wife eating it, but she had taken his share away after taking a bite. He didn't even get to eat a bite. As for the tofu pudding, it was even better to please his wife. She used pearl powder on her face every day, so she would definitely like it. He could only hope that the tofu pudding could take away some of her love for ruggiamo. Otherwise, he felt that he wouldn't be able to live for long. "Sir, if you want to eat something, you can come earlier at noon." Meg took back his hand from Vicenio's and expressed his sympathy for his friend's experience. However, there was nothing he could do about it. He could only pray that the strength he gained from the young Jew fried rice could keep up with the wild nature of his tigress after eating ruggiamo. "Mr. Mac, would you like to try a bowl of young Jew fried rice for me first? Look at me, I'm so hungry that I can't even walk." Vicenio looked at Meg pitifully and reached out to hold the door frame, as if he would fall down at any time. "Sorry, the restaurant doesn't serve food after opening hours." Meg shook his head. "Money is not a problem. I can give you double, even triple, 18 gold coins for a plate of young Jew fried rice. I can give it to you now." Vicenio took out his money bag and prepared to take out some money. "This is the restaurant's rule. Not even 10 times. Meg refused without hesitation. He pointed to the front and said, "There's a noodle shop about 50 meters ahead. You can go there for breakfast before you go back. Young Jew fried rice is not an elixir. Even if you eat a bowl of it, it won't make you full of energy again." "Okay, then I'll come earlier at noon. I'll find a tea house in the morning and sit down. I don't dare to go home again," Vicenio said helplessly when he saw that Meg was not swayed at all. "Goodbye, Uncle Weak. You have to stay awake. If you fall down, no one will help you. If you can't climb back, you won't be able to eat the delicious rainbow fried rice for lunch." Amy waved at Vicenio and warned him with a serious expression. Vicenio raised his eyebrows. This girl's tone sounded like she cared about him, but why did it sound a little strange? There seemed to be something wrong. Oh right. What the hell is Uncle Weak? Although I do look quite weak now, it's too strange to use this as a nickname. Vicenio stared at her, but when he saw the concerned expression on Amy's delicate and cute little face, his heart softened. What could he do? Of course, he chose to forgive her. After getting married, what he wanted the most was to have a child. Unfortunately, his wife didn't like children and didn't want any. It had been 4 or 5 years, and there was no news. Having such a cute little daughter was simply a winner in life. He couldn't help but look at Meg with some envy. He nodded and slowly walked away. Father, do you think Uncle Weak can last until noon? Amy asked worriedly as she looked at Vicenio's back. He should be fine. Meg looked at Vicenio, who almost stumbled and fell. He was also a little doubtful, but he quickly withdrew his gaze. He smiled and patted Amy's head. Little Amy just said that she wanted to learn the second song, right? Let's go. Father will open it for you. That's right, that's right. Amy immediately clapped her little hands and nodded with elation. Ugly Duckling's face was twisted out of shape in her arms, and it looked up at the ceiling in despair. It didn't even dare to make a sound. Are you going to teach Amy a new children's song? Yarbemia was also looking forward to it. Aside from Ugly Duckling, Amy's favorite toy was the little singing elf. She could sing really well. Meg closed the restaurant door and walked over to the counter. He took out the music box and put it on the counter. He turned off the single loop and clicked on the next song. He was also looking at the music box with anticipation, wondering what kind of classic children's song the system would give him this time. A circle of colored lights lit up around the hemispherical glass ball, and the sonorous sound of electric guitars and drums rang out. The little sprite inside also began to move stiffly, and the rhythm was so bright and powerful. Furthermore, it was a little familiar. Chapter 140. As he listened to that familiar melody and watched the little elven puppet trying its best to twist its stiff body in an attempt to keep up with the rhythm, but its movements were strangely deformed because of the restrictions on its movements, Mag felt very uncomfortable. As someone who had been on Weibo for a long time in his previous life, he was no stranger to this divine song that had once caused a bloodbath on Bilibili. However, this song could appear anywhere, so why did it appear in this music box that Mag intended to use to teach Amy a nursery rhyme? Furthermore, if it were just a song, then that would be one thing. But what was up with this dancing fairy? Even though she was wearing a long dress and had a pair of long legs, she didn't have many joints that she could move. As such, aside from the movements of her hands, all of her other movements were completely out of shape, making her look rather awkward. The system believes that the song Gokuraku Jodo has a very wide audience, and the target audience is quite young, so it fits the category of a children's song. Aside from the song itself, it can also be used to teach children how to dance. It could be said to be a classic example of combining education with entertainment, the system said in a calm voice. Combining education with entertainment? Come here, system. I promise I won't beat you to death. Meg almost burst into laughter. If Gokuraku Jodo could be used to teach children how to dance, then wouldn't Pomp and Circumstance become a textbook? Wow. Amy looked up at the little fairy in the music box with her bright blue eyes wide open. She was completely captivated, and she held Ugly Duckling in one hand as she waved her little hand in the air with an eager expression. Ugly Duckling rolled its eyes as it tried to poke its head out to see what the little fairy was doing, and its little legs began to tremble uncontrollably. Such beautiful music, and, is this a dance? It looks so interesting. Yarbemia was also staring intently at the little fairy. Even though she felt that the little fairy's movements were a little awkward and disjointed, this was the first time that she had heard such a special song. She didn't know what kind of musical accompaniment was being used, but it was as if it had some kind of magical power that made her body involuntarily want to sway along with it. However, she didn't know what language the song was being sung in, but it sounded a little like rap. It wasn't the common language of the continent, but she felt that the female voice had a hint of seduction to it. Look, regardless of whether it's a 4-year-old child, a 17-year-old teenager, or even a small animal, they're all attracted by this beautiful song. They all want to see the dance of Gokuraku Jodo, the system said smugly. It seemed to be very satisfied with the reactions from Amy and Yarbemia. Good, you lazy idiot, Yarbemia. Yarbemia, 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 Yarbemia's voice. Yarbemia, Yarbemia, of course, Yarbemia's heart. Yarbemia, Yarbemia, of course, Yarbemia by Yarbemia of the Gokuraku Yarbemia of Yarbemia Yarbemia, Yarbemia Yarbemia Yarbemia, Yarbemia, Yarbemia Yarbemia, Yarbemia, Yarbemia Yaya, Yarbemia, Yarbemia to Yarbemia father, this is so interesting. Yarbemia wants to learn. Amy tugged at Mag's sleeve with an expectant look on her face. Mag seemed to be in a daze as he stood off to the side. Yarbemia wants to learn. Meg's expression immediately became a little peculiar. The situation that he was most worried about had occurred. Yarbemia, I think it'll be very beautiful to dance. Yarbemia wants to learn. I want to learn right now. Amy nodded as she placed Ugly Duckling onto a nearby chair. She then began to dance with her short little arms. If it's possible, can I also learn? Yarbemia asked in a hesitant voice. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito's, but her eyes were filled with yearning. Meg was a little conflicted as he looked at the expectant looks on his two daughters' faces. As a father, he naturally didn't want Amy to learn Gokuraku Jodo as her first dance. However, after thinking about it carefully, there wasn't anything special about this dance. He looked at Amy, and imagined her dancing to Gokuraku Jodo with her short little legs, and a smile appeared on his face. She would definitely be super adorable, right? As for Yarbemia, Meg's gaze swept over her body. She had a big chest, a thin waist, and long legs, so it would be quite interesting to see her dance in a maid costume. Alright, then you two can learn it. Meg's conflicted expression didn't last for too long. Seeing as Amy and Yarbemia both liked the dance, it was naturally more important for them to be happy. In any case, he was going to be the first to watch the dance, so he could just correct any mistakes later. Father, you're the best. Amy swung Meg's hand from side to side with an elated expression. Thank you, boss. Yarbemia also clenched her fists and tiptoed happily. However, she immediately returned to her standing position, but her expression still couldn't hide the joy on her face. Ever since she was a child, she had dreamed that one day, she would be able to dance on the center stage of Aiden Square in beautiful dresses and bring the audience's cheers and applause with her light and graceful movements. However, ever since she was a child, she hadn't even seen a dance except for that one day every year, let alone learn it. However, things were different now. The puppet that Meg gave to Amy was very magical. It was as if it would never get tired. If she could continue to perform, Yarbemia believed that she would definitely be able to learn it. Even if it took a long time, she didn't mind. Seeing how happy the two of them were, Meg also smiled. However, when his gaze fell on the puppet that was wriggling stiffly, he couldn't help but frown. If this was the standard of the dance, then what Amy and Yarbemia learned would be a shoddy version of the Gokuraku Jodo. He had to solve this problem first. Level 1 package, Power Supply Modification. 4 AA batteries can be converted into super high-capacity lithium batteries. Charge them for 3 minutes and last for 3 hours. A full charge can be used for 3 consecutive days. Cost, 10 gold coins. Free original charger. Level 2 package, Power Supply Modification plus Outfit Replacement. Provides 10 sets of cute clothes for the puppet to change into. No need to disassemble. Cost, 20 gold coins. Level 3 package, Power Supply Modification plus Quad-Plane Projection Modification. 4 embedded LED screens can be used to view the dance from 4 different directions. All dance moves can be played. Cost, 100 gold coins. Level 4 package, Power Supply Upgrade plus Holographic Projection Modification. Implant the latest holographic projection device. After switching on the device, the puppet will be as lifelike as the real thing. The image is 3-dimensional and has no blind spots. All dance moves can be accurately completed. Also, There is an AI dance teaching function that can be taught according to the learner's aptitude and learning progress. Chapter 141. Meg looked at the familiar modification form in his mind. His lips moved, but he resisted the urge to curse. He suddenly understood why the system would come up with the Gokuraku Jodo. It was trying to cheat him of his money. Moreover, this was not an ordinary trick. The system did not ask for it, nor did it promote it. Instead, it dug a hole and waited for him to jump into it willingly. System, doesn't your conscience hurt? Mag tried to make himself sound as calm as possible. Host, this system does not have such a thing. The system replied calmly, as if it was trying to restrain its pride. Very good. Mag heaved a sigh of relief. His tone had already become relaxed as he curiously asked, System, what is the 5th-tier set meal? This music box does not have a level 5 package. The system replied. Is that so? Didn't you say that I can modify it with more money? What if I feel that this holographic projection and semi-intelligence are not enough? Meg asked. How much? The system was silent for a while, and then asked tentatively. That depends on how much you can modify it. Meg's lips curled up. Now, the initiative was reversed. The host's authority level is too low. This system temporarily does not modify anything other than the level 5 package. The system seemed to have realized this, and said seriously, You know, my daily turnover is very high now. Yesterday, I had more than 1,500 gold coins. Meg said slowly. As long as it does not violate the 3 laws of the system, the host can ask for anything. The price is negotiable. If there are many modifications, there will be additional discounts and surprises waiting for you. The system's voice suddenly became cheerful, and it almost called him Grandpa. Very good. I am very satisfied with your service attitude. Meg praised. Providing the host with a comfortable service is the purpose of my service. The system's voice came. Very good. Then I want to install a complete artificial intelligence for this music box. The intelligence should be twice as high as yours, so that my girl will not be kidnapped. Meg said seriously. The system silently floated a line of ellipses. It was silent for a long time before it said in a tone that was as calm as possible, Host, please don't doubt the system's intelligence. The system is well versed in astronomy and geography. After continuous learning, it has already grasped 80% of the macroscopic knowledge of the universe, and is still learning. In this world, I am an omniscient and omnipotent God. A system like you, how much would it cost to buy one? Meg suddenly interrupted. Should be, at least a few 100 million gold coins. The system thought for a while and said with uncertainty. Then, can I sell you? Meg asked again. This time, the system was silent for a long time. After a while, it roared, Host, please take our conversation and trade. Do you think I am that easy to sell? Is there anyone who can pay this price? Even if there is, you must share half of the money with me. Actually, you also want to sell yourself, right? Meg tried to grasp the key point. The system fell into silence. This kind of behavior that was similar to a tacit agreement made Meg break the bottom line of the system's moral integrity again. Host, this system needs to reiterate again. This system is a proper gourmet system. In order to ease the resentment of chefs, the heavens created me to supervise your growth to become the god of cookery in the other world. The system's serious voice came online again and said seriously, on the road to becoming the god of cookery, continuous effort is what you should do. Unlock one gourmet dish after another and let them shine in the other world. Only then will you live up to the experience of the top chefs that you have received. That is the condensation of the experience and hard work of countless chefs. System, I still want a level 4 set meal. Meg did not listen to his words at all. He frowned and said, 200 gold coins is too expensive. Can't you make it cheaper? It's a fixed price, no bargaining. The system's firm voice sounded, and then it said, this holographic projection device has been modified by the system based on existing technology. The details have been refined to the extreme, and the characters are basically indistinguishable from the real thing. Because it is a test version, It can be modified for 200 gold coins. When it is officially produced, it will cost at least 500 gold coins. Meg looked at Amy and Yarbemia, who were seriously staring at the stiff elf twisting her body, and said without hesitation, "Then 190 gold coins. You can take back the first modification. 10 gold coins will offset it. The first modification has passed the 3-day trial period. Cancel it now," the host said hesitantly. "If it can't offset it, then I won't buy it." In any case, they haven't seen the real Gokuraku Jodo dance. "Dancing like this is fine," Meg said calmly. 190 gold coins have been deducted. The host can make an appointment for the modification. The modification will take 20 minutes. A line of words floated by the system. "Let's do it in half an hour." Meg looked at Amy and Yarbemia, who were so engrossed in watching the dance and twisting their arms. The two little fellows who had never danced before were both funny and cute. Even Ugly Duckling, who was standing on a chair at the side, was shaking its little legs to the beat. Especially Amy, who was seriously raising her lotus root-like hands. Although he couldn't understand what the lower half of her body was doing, she still moved her little legs to the beat and looked so cute. Meg couldn't help but smile. Was 200 gold coins expensive? 20,000 copper coins was indeed expensive. But since he was buying it for Amy, it wasn't expensive at all. What was the point of working so hard every day to earn so much money? Wasn't it so that Amy could live happily every day? The restaurant's income should be able to go up another level today. He had saved half of the 10,000 gold coins he spent on the first strength point, and he would have enough in a few days. At this rate, he estimated that he would be able to complete the mission of 1,000 people spending money in the restaurant. After the transaction was completed, Meg couldn't be bothered to waste time talking to the system. He saw Yarbemia, who was clumsily learning from the system, completely immersed in the dance. Thus, he started to clean up the restaurant. "Mr. Mac, let me do it. You rest first." After the song ended, Yarbemia realized that Meg was already cleaning up the restaurant. She hurriedly walked over and said apologetically, "It's okay. Why don't you dance with me for a while longer?" Meg said with a smile, "No, I'm working now. I can wait until I'm done." Yarbemia shook her head firmly. She took the rag from Meg and started to clean up the table. Chapter 142. Dancing, especially at the Elysium Jodo Club, wasn't something that Mag was interested in. His tone-deaf dancing skills were terrible as well. After dancing with her for a while, he couldn't bear it any longer, so he gave up and sat down to watch her dance. The smile on his face didn't disappear from his face the entire time. Just like her singing talent, Amy's dancing talent was probably inherited from her mother. Although her movements were still a little immature, she was learning very quickly. Her hands were already somewhat similar, and she looked extremely cute when she swayed with her short hands. And this was the result of learning from a puppet whose movements weren't very smooth. She would definitely be able to learn even better when the holographic projection version was switched to. Ugly Duckling didn't have enough energy to jump on the chair. It slid down the chair and jumped around Amy excitedly. Meg looked at the lively Ugly Duckling, and thought for a moment before saying, "Ugly Duckling, don't drink goat milk today. Eat tofu pudding instead." Meow. Ugly Duckling looked back at Meg, and seemed to understand what he was saying. Its sapphire eyes lit up, and it jumped over and rubbed its little head against Meg's leg. It was very obedient all of a sudden. Amy also stopped dancing upon hearing that, and asked happily, "Father, can Ugly Duckling eat other things now?" "Yes, almost. Ugly Duckling grows faster than other people's cats. Let's start with tofu pudding." Meg nodded with a smile. Cats in this world were indeed different. It had only hatched a few days ago, but it was already almost as big as the orange cat he had raised in his previous life when it was a month old. "But isn't tofu pudding sold out?" Amy looked at Meg with a perplexed expression. "There should be a little left. It should be enough for it." Meg stood up and walked to the kitchen. After breakfast, there were still about 2 small bowls of tofu pudding left. He put them in the incubator before opening the restaurant, but they didn't taste as good as when they had first come out of the pot. "Meow, meow, meow." Ugly Duckling jumped back and forth happily. Soon, it stood at the kitchen door and stared at Meg with unblinking eyes. It was the first time it could eat something other than goat milk, and it looked very excited. What flavor does the little guy like? Meg turned around to look at Ugly Duckling, who was standing at the door with an expectant look in its eyes. He hesitated momentarily before mixing a bowl of sweet and salty condiments, and then bought 2 reddish-blue bowls from the system. Ugly Duckling's utensils were all independent of each other. Although Ugly Duckling often bathed in Amy's arms and was very clean, Meg still couldn't accept it sharing utensils at the dining table. Furthermore, it would definitely be uncomfortable if the customers saw it. Sweet or salty, which one would Ugly Duckling like? Amy stepped forward and glanced at the 2 steaming bowls of tofu pudding in Meg's hands with a curious look on her face. Yarbemia also stopped what he was doing and made his way over to Ugly Duckling with a curious expression. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling stared at the 2 bowls in Meg's hands and swallowed its saliva. It had been drooling ever since it was in Amy's arms this morning, and now that it could finally eat it, it was so eager that it stood up on its hind legs. However, its stubby legs weren't strong enough, and it fell backward with wide eyes, creating an extremely comical sight to behold. Ugly Duckling, look at how stupid you are. If you fall and become even more stupid, I won't want you anymore, Amy said to Ugly Duckling with a disdainful expression. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling immediately scrambled to its feet and rubbed itself against Amy's calf before looking at the 2 bowls in Meg's hands with an expectant look in its eyes. Meg placed the 2 bowls beside the counter, and warned Ugly Duckling in a serious manner, eat here. Don't knock over the bowls, and don't drop them on the floor. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling nodded. It understood Meg's words, and its eyes lit up as it looked at the 2 bowls of tofu pudding. It sniffed at the savory one on the left, then sniffed at the sweet one on the right, as if it were struggling to decide which one to eat. The 3 of them all stared at Ugly Duckling, wondering which one it would choose. I think the sweet one is super delicious, Yarbemia offered its opinion in a feeble voice. The savory one is more flavorful, and it's more appetizing, Meg said with a smile. I think both the sweet one and the savory one are super delicious. Eat the savory one first, then the sweet one. That's the best, Amy suggested earnestly. However, Ugly Duckling seemed to be completely intoxicated by the aroma of the tofu pudding, and it completely ignored the 3 of them. After hesitating for a while, it finally stopped in front of the sweet tofu pudding, and slowly stuck its head out to lick the layer of reddish-golden syrup on the surface. Meow. Ugly Duckling's eyes immediately lit up with excitement, and it immediately lowered its head to eat happily. The reddish-golden syrup mixed with the tofu pudding, and a sweet bean aroma wafted through the air. It likes sweet tofu pudding. Yarbemia's eyes lit up with elation. Don't be so sure about that. Meg was quite calm. That little guy had hesitated for a long time just then. Ugly Duckling lowered its head and ate happily for a while before lying down. It wrapped its 2 short legs around the bowl, and rested its head on the rim of the bowl as it found a comfortable position to continue eating. Ugly Duckling, you're so delicious, and you're so lazy. You're going to get fat in the future. Amy looked at Ugly Duckling with a resigned expression. 9 out of 10 orange cats are fat, and one of them is going to collapse the bed. That's true. Meg shook his head in resignation at the sight of Ugly Duckling, which was even finding a comfortable position to eat. It appeared that Black Coal's words were going to come true. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before Ugly Duckling's weight skyrocketed. Only after finishing the entire bowl of sweet tofu pudding did Ugly Duckling raise its head. Its little face and whiskers were stained with tofu pudding, and it licked its lips as if it hadn't had enough yet. It immediately turned its gaze to the bowl of savory tofu pudding beside it. Meg looked at the bowl, which had been licked clean. There wasn't even a speck of syrup left. He had thought that Ugly Duckling would stand up to try the savory tofu pudding, but to his surprise, it had no intention of standing up at all. Instead, it crawled over to the bowl, grabbed onto the new bowl with its short legs, and began to eat again. It was as happy as when it was eating the sweet tofu pudding. Haha, looks like Ugly Duckling likes both types of tofu pudding as well. It just likes to eat the sweet one first before the savory one. Amy was elated as she squatted down to pat Ugly Duckling's head. She seemed to be very pleased with its performance. Is it going to eat both? Yarbemia was a little disappointed. Chapter 143. Modification. Amy looked at Meg, then at the music box in his hand, and asked in confusion, "But I think the mushroom fairy is very good. Why do you need to modify her? Are you giving up on her? No, don't you like dancing? But the current mushroom fairy's movements are too sluggish. You can modify her a little, and she can teach you how to dance. She can change into all kinds of pretty little clothes, but she'll still be the original mushroom fairy." Meg shook his head with a smile. It seemed that Amy had developed some feelings for the mushroom fairy. Really? That's great. But how long will it take? Amy's eyes lit up. In that case, she'll definitely dance better, right? Yarbemia was also looking forward to it. About half an hour. You can play with Ugly Duckling for a while longer. Meg nodded, and went upstairs with the music box. The system said that the modification would take 20 minutes, but this time, Meg had to make sure that the system didn't install anything strange in it before letting Amy play with it. Burp. After finishing the savory tofu pudding, Ugly Duckling burped and rolled over to lie on the ground, revealing its round white belly and closing its eyes in satisfaction. Ugly Duckling, don't lie down after eating. Amy pinched Ugly Duckling's ear. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling meowed lazily, and rubbed its head against Amy's foot before lying down in a more comfortable position, completely unmoved. Amy withdrew her hand, and looked at Ugly Duckling with furrowed brows. Suddenly, her eyes lit up, and she murmured softly, "If I fatten it up, it'll grow up, right? If it grows up." Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling seemed to have heard Amy's words, and it jumped up from the ground. It raised its head and meowed at Amy twice, and then began to walk around the restaurant, turning back to meow at Amy as if to prove that it was working hard. "It's okay. I think you can lie down now." Amy shook her head, and a dangerous smile appeared on her face. Meow. Ugly Duckling's voice rose a few octaves as it began to jog around the restaurant. Meg, who had just come downstairs, couldn't help but shake his head with a smile upon seeing this. It seemed that Ugly Duckling was still some distance away from the beautiful days of sleeping. Meg didn't stay idle while the system reclaimed the music box. He went into the kitchen to knead dough and prepare the ingredients. He didn't need to clean the restaurant now, and he didn't need to go out to buy goat milk for Ugly Duckling, so he had a lot of time to prepare more biji bread. Anyway, he had 2 ovens now, so he didn't have to worry about running out of time. After receiving the system's reminder, Mag washed his hands and went upstairs. Amy, who was chasing Ugly Duckling, and Yarbemia, who was mopping the floor, looked over at the same time with anticipation in their eyes. Meg went upstairs and took out the music box from the cupboard. Its appearance hadn't changed much, but it was a lot taller overall. The pixie puppet in the semicircle was gone, and the froth and snow on the ground had also disappeared. A few small red dots could be seen on the flat bottom of the music box. Furthermore, a small 4-inch screen had appeared on the side of the base. It seemed that it had entered the touchscreen era. The modification of the holographic projection system has been completed. According to the host's request, the main image is still that of a pixie. The system can provide 10 sets of basic clothing, and at the same time, provide a variety of clothing and accessories. As long as you charge money, you can unlock more clothing and accessories, and experience the fun of wearing them. Wait. System. I only want a simple holographic projection music box. Why did you put Miracle Nuanuan in it as well? You're trying to instigate underage people to spend money like this. Meg interrupted the system. This guy was getting better and better at making money, and now it was targeting Amy. Host, please don't compare the clothing system developed by the system to those trashy games. The clothing provided by the system is exquisite and rich, and the special effects are better than those in the blockbuster movies. With the help of holographic projection technology, it can show the details of the clothing in all aspects, giving the player an unparalleled experience. Therefore, the system explained seriously with a hint of pride. I want a child lock or parental supervision mode. No pop-up advertisements or any inducements are allowed. Otherwise, I'll return the goods, Meg said with a cold expression. Host, you're killing a child's nature. It's not conducive to the budding and growth of a young girl's heart. This is a twisted tyrant's education, the system protested. TCH, a child's nature is killed by unscrupulous game developers like you. We didn't play Mobile Legends every day when we were young. Meg pursed his lips with disdain. Perhaps we should give the little girl some freedom of choice. The system gave in and tried to negotiate. Didn't you say that I can return the goods within 3 days? Meg didn't leave any room for negotiation. Okay, all pop-up advertisements have been closed. Pay lock has been activated. Parental mode has been activated. The system's voice sounded a little dejected. Meg nodded with satisfaction and asked, also, you don't have those messy things like Majestic Presence in here, do you? How is Majestic Presence a messy thing? It's the crystallization of an artist's hard work. It's an alternative form of art. The system said excitedly. Enough with the nonsense. How many songs and dance tunes have you inserted into here? I'll see for myself. Meg interrupted the system. This guy was too unreliable. It seemed that self-taught people had a serious problem, and that was that they couldn't understand why some things were not suitable for children. Apologies, host. Because the system determined that too many dance tunes in a short period of time could cause a huge impact on the otaku culture of this world, the only dance tune that the host can view is Gokuraku Jodo. The second song will only be available after the user learns it. The song list can be viewed in the song section. Currently, 30 children's songs are available for free. The system's serious voice sounded. You win. Meg's hand trembled, and he almost threw the music box in his hand. After opening the music box, he saw that there were subsections for changing clothes, dance lessons, music lessons, and so on. Meg directly opened the music lesson section. The children's songs were quite normal. The first song was Little Girl Picking Mushrooms that Amy had just learned. After that, there were other familiar children's songs like Two Brain Tigers and Little Duckling. Chapter 144. The air suddenly fell silent. Meg looked at the golden pop-up ad, and his eyebrows twitched. He wanted to be angry, but he also wanted to laugh at the same time. My bad, my bad. I missed one. The system was silent for a while before its awkward voice sounded, and the pop-up ad disappeared. This system is really unscrupulous in order to earn money. I'm afraid it has forgotten what kind of system it is. Meg shook his head and heaved an internal sigh. He didn't know if he was lucky to have encountered a system like this. A holographic simulation game? A game controller? Interesting. I can look into it when I have time. Meg wasn't in a hurry to open the projector, nor did he want to continue arguing with the system. He carried the music box downstairs, where his 2 little ones were waiting for him. Father, where's the mushroom fairy? Amy looked at the empty hemispherical glass in Meg's hands, and hurried over to him with an anxious expression. Ugly Duckling sprawled onto the ground, finally able to catch its breath as it rolled its eyes and looked up into the sky. I'm not eating anymore. I'm never going to eat another bowl. Yarbemia also made her way over and looked at the music box with a confused expression. Meg had said that he was going to modify the music box to make it smoother, but now that the mushroom fairy was gone, who was going to teach dancing? Of course, she was completely confident that Meg wouldn't lie to Amy. However, she was still a little perplexed. Could the mushroom fairy have appeared out of thin air? Don't be anxious and don't blink. Now is the time to witness a miracle. Meg wasn't in a hurry to explain. He placed the music box on the table and tapped on the icon to awaken the main character. Amy and Yarbemia both stared at the music box with wide eyes, their little faces full of anticipation. Even Ugly Duckling, which was lying on the ground beside them, looked up as if it wanted to know what would happen. The lights beside the crystal ball seemed to have been changed as well. The cheap flashing lights had been replaced with miniature stage lights. Following a crisp tinkling sound that sounded like spring water falling into a pond, beams of light lit up, and the dazzling lights intertwined before finally converging at the center of the crystal ball. Ding! With a crisp sound, a colorful light suddenly rose from the center of the crystal ball. It was as if fireworks had suddenly bloomed. The The colors were gorgeous and dazzling. So beautiful. Amy and Yarbemia exclaimed at the same time, and their eyes lit up. This was a beautiful scene that they had never seen before. It was even more beautiful than the lights on Peace Memorial Day. What was even more miraculous was that this gorgeous light did not disappear immediately after it dispersed. It actually floated in the air and slowly shrank before suddenly bursting out with a dazzling 7-colored light. When the light receded, a beautiful blonde elf appeared in the center of the sphere. She had long eyelashes and lively eyes, and she wore a tight-fitting knee-length silver dress, revealing a pair of slender calves. She looked at everyone with a smile and nodded. "I'm Anne, nice to meet you." "Wow. That's awesome." Amy clapped her little hands as she made her way over. She walked around the table with her mouth agape. The elf had looked like a wooden sculpture before, but now it looked like a real one. Her skin was white, and her smile was beautiful. It was as if there really was a little elf trapped inside. So cute. But was that a summoning? Yarbemia was also shocked and a little confused. The lights that had just lit up seemed to be a summoning ritual, but this elf looked so real and could even speak on her own. Could it be that Mr. Mac had just summoned a little elf? Even Ugly Duckling, who was lying on the ground with a dispirited expression, immediately stood up and walked over curiously, craning its neck to get a closer look. "No, you're not Anne, you're the mushroom elf." Amy suddenly thought of something, and she shook her head as she looked at the little elf. A human-like expression of confusion appeared on the little elf's face as she looked at Amy with a perplexed expression. Is this the legendary semi-intelligent system? Meg also looked at the half-elf with a little surprise. Holographic projection technology had already been developed to a certain extent in his previous life. Luo Tianyi's concert had used holographic projection technology. However, the system did have the right to be proud. It was able to make holographic projections with such clarity that they were almost identical to the real thing. Even the slightest expression could be captured and displayed. The level of intelligence was not bad. Although it was not as good as the system, it was much better than the idiotic system that had a fixed response language. This kind of technology was indeed ahead of its time. If it wasn't so greedy, Meg felt that the system was quite impressive. $20,000 for a toy like this doesn't seem to be a loss. I'm looking forward to seeing what those so-called holographic games are like. Meg looked at the happy Amy with a smile on his face. "Mushroom Elf. That's your real name. You must have forgotten that you're not Anne," Amy said seriously as she looked at the elf. "Is that so?" The elf looked even more confused, and she began to doubt herself. "Yes, that's right. You're the Mushroom Elf." Amy nodded with certainty. "I'm the Mushroom Elf," the elf repeated. "Yes, you are." Amy nodded. "Hello. I'm the Mushroom Elf." The elf nodded. "That's right. You finally remembered who you are." Remi clapped her hands happily. "Ari's intelligence reduction method?" Meg looked at the elf who had been successfully brainwashed by Amy with a strange expression. She had lost a good name just like that. But Yarbemia's mouth gaped open in disbelief as she stared at the little elf who had accepted her nickname as her name. However, since she had already accepted it, there was no need for her to say anything. "Okay, if you want to learn dancing, you can now learn from the Mushroom Elf." Meg was just about to click on the operation interface. "If you want to learn dancing, you can only choose the Pure Land of Bliss. Do you want to learn it?" The Mushroom Elf asked herself. "Yes." Amy and Yarbemia answered at the same time. They looked at the elf curiously. She could really understand them. "Okay. First, you'll need an open space of about 3 square meters. This way, you won't bump into anything during the learning process. Then, follow me to learn how to dance. Watch the complete version first," the Mushroom Elf said with a smile. The Pure Land of Bliss sounded, and the elf in a tight silver dress started dancing. Chapter 145. Although it was beautiful, Meg was an aspiring god of cookery candidate, after all, so he went back to the kitchen to continue cooking after only watching it 5 times. Compared to the puppet with a strange rhythm, the holographic projection was indeed superior in all aspects. Furthermore, this semi-intelligent system was also very flexible. Apart from the fact that it couldn't correct mistakes step by step, the teaching process was step by step, and it could also capture Amy and Yarbemia's real-time progress. It was like a professional dance teacher. Yarbemia moved the 2 tables to the side to create an empty space for the 2 of them to practice their dance. She also lowered the curtains to block the prying eyes from outside. Yarbemia was a little embarrassed when Meg looked at her like that, but she didn't see any mockery in Meg's eyes. Instead, he looked at her with the same gentle gaze as he looked at Amy. She gradually got used to it, and devoted herself to learning the dance. Ugly Duckling also stood off to the side in high spirits, jumping here and there to join in the fun. It was much more enthusiastic than when Amy had asked it to run. This is good. What's the point of thinking about work all day long? Meg looked at Yarbemia, who was trying to straighten her hands clumsily, and smiled. I hope this girl can slowly walk out of her trauma and find true happiness and warmth in the restaurant. During lunch, Meg made a small portion of Yangju fried rice for Ugly Duckling, and then chopped up a piece of braised meat with more lean meat with his chopsticks and put it on another plate. Meg was worried that the cat wouldn't get used to the food, but to his surprise, Ugly Duckling leaned over and sniffed at the food, and immediately meowed happily. It lay down on the ground with its little bowl in its hands, and buried its head in the food happily. As expected of a cat that can eat anything. Meg withdrew his gaze and also began to eat. Father, it was so fun to learn how to dance today. I want to learn again in the afternoon, Amy said happily as she took a big bite of Ruggiamo. Yarbemia, who was standing aside with a Ruggiamo in her hand, was also looking at Mag expectantly. She had been dancing for 2 hours in the morning, and her face was still flushed. She felt that it was much harder than working, but she had never felt so happy before. She felt so happy. Okay, but we have to wait until all the guests have left. We can't disturb the guests from eating. Meg nodded with a smile. Amy would be learning magic from Crassus starting tomorrow. Father, you're the best, Amy said happily. Yarbemia's face lit up with excitement, and its golden dragon tail, which had sprung out from eating the Ruggiamo, swayed back and forth. Meg took a bite of his Ruggiamo with a smile. They had made a simple agreement in the morning. She would learn from Crassus for 3 days, Julian for 3 days, and she would have a day off at the same time as the restaurant. Meg could accept this arrangement. Amy would come back for 3 meals, and she would also have a little lunch break. She was just like a day kindergarten student. Furthermore, Mag had 2 teachers who were similar in strength but didn't like each other, so he didn't have to worry that Amy would be taught too strictly and intensely. If there were any problems, the 2 teachers who were waiting to pick on each other would definitely point them out immediately, which would greatly reduce the risk of learning magic. Meow, meow tilde soon, Ugly Duckling finished the Yangju fried rice and meat on the plate. It licked its greasy mouth, looked up at Meg, and meowed twice, as if it hadn't had enough. Ever since Meg had fed it delicious food, it liked Meg very much. It almost wanted to ride on his coattails. Do you want more, Ugly Duckling? I can give you some from my plate, Amy said to Ugly Duckling with a smile as she poked her head out of the window. Ugly Duckling turned to look at Amy. It looked up at the smile on Amy's face, and a hint of confusion appeared on its face. Amy continued with a smile, if you eat enough, you'll grow up faster, and then, Ugly Duckling immediately shook its head and backed away with a look of horror on its face. No more. No more. I can't eat this. Mag took a look at the 2 plates that had been licked clean. At this rate, Ugly Duckling should be full as well. However, it seemed that Ugly Duckling's appetite was a lot bigger than its appetite. If he didn't want it to grow too big in a few months, it was necessary to control its appetite. Everything has its vanquisher, and Xiao Mi happened to be able to control its mouth. After lunch, Yarbemia cleared the table. Meg took a look at his watch, and walked over to raise the shutters. He poked his head out, and raised his eyebrows. There was a long line that stretched from the entrance to the square, and it even automatically turned when it came to the green belt. There were over 100 people, and it was a spectacular sight. The customers were all lining up consciously. Demons, humans, dwarfs, orcs, and elves were all lining up in the same line. This was a scene that had never been seen in other restaurants. Some of the new customers were going to knock on the door, but after seeing the fearsome orcs, burly orcs, and even people wearing grey temple badges lining up obediently, they all stood silently at the back of the line. The aura was too terrifying, and they didn't dare to stand out. A few restaurant owners gathered together and looked in the direction of Amy's with envy and jealousy. I've never seen such a long line in the Aden Square. TSK, this owner is really something. A lady boss wearing a floral apron clicked her tongue. That's right. We've been running a restaurant here for more than 20 years. Why can't we compete with a restaurant that's only been open for a few days? The half-bald uncle at the side touched his oily head and was puzzled. Could it be that the owner put drugs in the food? So those customers can't stop eating, and come here every day? A skinny old man's eyes lit up. Yeah. I also think there's something wrong. Those customers are all acting strangely after coming out of that restaurant. This morning, a little girl walked past me with a biscuit wrapped in paper. She took a bite, and it made a sound. That owner must have put some kind of drug in the biscuit, an old woman at the side chimed in. If that's really the case, we should report it to the Grey Temple immediately. Yeah. Everyone's eyes lit up. This was an important piece of information. This restaurant had taken away too many customers, and had already affected their business significantly. Chapter 146. This butcher. The old woman's face turned red and she couldn't finish her sentence. Everyone looked at each other and fell into a strange and awkward silence. I'll go take a look as well. What kind of delicious food did the boss make that could captivate so many customers? The lady boss with the flowery apron also took off her apron and walked towards the restaurant. Let's all go and try it. Only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you come up with a countermeasure. The half-bald man looked at the two people walking away and said to the crowd with a smile. He also began to take off his apron. Everyone laughed when they heard that, and chimed in. They removed their aprons, and walked toward Mammy Restaurant in a majestic manner. Another new wave of customers. Meg looked at the long line outside the door with the corners of his mouth slightly raised. He tried not to look too proud as he pulled the lock and opened the door. The customers in the long line all looked towards the door when they heard the sound. Many of them had been waiting for quite some time, but the regulars knew the restaurant's rules, so no one knocked on the door to disturb Meg. Mr. Mac, I've been waiting at the door for the whole morning. My legs are numb. Vicenio, who was first in line, looked at Meg with a bitter face. His voice was weak, and he barely managed to stand up by holding onto the door frame. The opening hours are written on the door. The restaurant is open according to the opening hours. Meg looked at Vicenio, who finally looked better after resting for the whole morning, and couldn't help but want to laugh in his heart. The saying women are like wolves and tigers was not without reason. All right, give me a hand. My legs are numb and I can't walk. Vicenio didn't want to be entangled in this issue. He lifted his leg and then pulled it back. He looked at Meg and said. After the experience in the morning, he didn't dare to let go of his hand that was holding onto the door frame immediately. The customers behind all smiled when they heard this. This guy is really going all out in order to get first place. All right. Meg reached out to help Vicenio in and sat down at the table next to the door. I want 3 servings of Yeongju fried rice. 2 for here and 1 to go. Vicenio said as soon as he sat down. Then, he quickly grabbed Meg's hand and asked in a low voice, Mr. Mac, are you sure this dish is mild? Brother, I can't take it anymore. Don't worry, it's milder than Ruggiamo. Meg retracted his hand and patted Vicenio's shoulder. All right, I'll believe you this time. Vicenio nodded, looking as if he was unafraid of death. Everyone can come in now. Please take your order and take your seat. Meg opened the door to the side and smiled at the guests outside. Then, he stepped aside to let them in. Welcome. Yarbemir quickly walked out of the kitchen with a smile. Then, he started taking orders for the customers according to the order they came in. Crassus was also in the front row. He walked to the door and said to Meg, Mr. Mac, I think you should give us a passage for the elderly. Old people like us can't stand waiting in line with the young people. Julian, who was in the line, immediately looked over. He had asked Charcoal and Green Bean to look after the restaurant this afternoon, and he had come early to line up. He had been waiting for almost half an hour. The other customers also craned their necks to look at Meg. If older people could get to the front of the line in the future, it would be useless even if they came early. Sorry, everyone who comes in is a customer. We treat everyone equally. Plus, you're old, and you're eating 2 bowls of Yeongju fried rice. You're not worse than the young people at all. Meg smiled and shook his head. There was no room for negotiation. He was not in a hospital. Why would he open a passage for the elderly? Crassus looked at Meg helplessly. He was Amy's master and had a high status, but this guy was still so stubborn. He really couldn't do anything about it. The restaurant was soon full. The rest of the customers could only stand in line. Many of them had come to buy Ruggiamo to take away, so the line stretched all the way to the counter and out of the restaurant. Meg's eyes fell on the back of the line. He was a little surprised. The 7 people at the back looked familiar, as if he had seen them somewhere before. He turned and walked to the kitchen. When he reached the door, Meg suddenly remembered that the fat man with the oily face seemed to be the owner of the pork chop shop in front of the restaurant. He had seen him killing pigs in front of the restaurant from time to time, so he had a deep impression of him. The others seemed to be restaurant owners as well. What are they doing here? Are they here to make trouble? Meg raised his eyebrows. Amy's had become a little famous in the Aden Square after a few days of hype. Although there were still not many customers in this corner of the restaurant, the long line at the door every time it opened was the best advertisement. One could see it from afar, and it attracted many curious customers. Such popularity naturally made him a thorn in the eyes of his peers. Customers were the most important thing to a restaurant, and Mag's restaurant could now accommodate several hundred customers in a single meal. Furthermore, all of them were high-quality customers, so this naturally affected other restaurants. Meg had expected to be targeted by his peers. After all, his family was in the business in his previous life. Although he had never been involved in the business, he was influenced by what he had heard and seen, so he wouldn't panic in such a situation. He could even predict that there would soon be imitators in the Aden Square. Yeongju fried rice and Ruggiamo would not only bring the ultimate enjoyment and experience to the customers, but also bring a completely different way of cooking to the chefs in this world. In fact, Meg didn't dislike imitators. It was interesting to start from a restaurant and influence the eating habits and cooking methods of this world. This confidence came from his ability. If the imitators didn't taste half as good as he did, he would lose. He could give chefs in this world a new direction in cooking, but he wouldn't teach them how to make Yeongju fried rice and Ruggiamo step by step. When it came to making money, there was no such thing as sharing it with everyone. Meg couldn't stop them from thinking about it after eating, or buying Ruggiamo and Yeongju fried rice to study. He couldn't ask the system to install a self-destruct device in the Ruggiamo, could he? How to wrap eggs around rice, how to braise meat, how to knead dough to make soft biji bread, how to turn soybeans into tofu pudding that melts in the mouth. I do have the direction, but without a few years of research, there shouldn't be many people who can do it. The ingredients provided by the system are the finishing touch, and the constant stream of new dishes is the core of the restaurant's competitiveness. There won't be another dish on this continent that is identical to Mami restaurants. A smile appeared on Mag's face. Chapter 147. The system's voice suddenly popped up. If you want, the system can help you develop the latest self-destruct device. It can automatically detect the intention of the person eating it. If it detects the intention of eating it, it can self-destruct. How much for one? Meg asked curiously. 10 gold coins for one batch, the system said after a while of silent calculation. Fuck off. Meg rolled his eyes and hurried into the kitchen. I only sell 1 Ruggiamo for 3 gold coins. Here's your Yeongju fried rice. Yarbemia placed the first plate of Yeongju fried rice in front of Vichenio with a smile. This poor customer was so hungry that he knelt down in front of Meg in the morning. His face was pale, and it seemed that he was starving. Thank you. Vichenio didn't even raise his head. His eyes were completely attracted by the Yeongju fried rice in front of him. Although he had seen other people eating it in the morning, he hadn't paid much attention to it at that time. Now, however, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva when he saw such a colorful, delicious dish in front of him. Yabemia walked in with the plate of Yeongju fried rice. The tempting aroma attracted many people's attention. The restaurant owners and visitors who happened to be lining up at the entrance all stared at the plate of fried rice in front of Vichenio with wide eyes. What's this? Why did he cut all the ingredients so small? It's not chewy at all, and I can't taste anything, Andrew said with a frown. Andrew frowned. His family's pork chops had always been famous in the Aden Square for their large portions. They were ranked 18th on the Aden Square's delicious cuisine rankings, partly because of their large portions. Every time he saw the customers happily munching on his pork chops, he would feel a sense of recognition. The aroma of the eggs blended perfectly with the other ingredients. It's so tempting. With this size, could it be that the egg was wrapped in rice? But the rice is so small. How did he manage to cover each grain with rice evenly? Bernice's eyes lit up, but she also had many doubts. Her restaurant's dishes were famous in the Aden Square for their delicacies. Her signature dish was ranked 13th on the Aden Square Delicious Cuisine rankings. She was good at making use of the characteristics of the ingredients, so she knew very well what kind of knife skills were needed to cut all the ingredients into the size of rice grains. The color of the ingredients is bright, and they are all top-quality ingredients. But did he stir-fry all these ingredients together? Added oil and seasoning? Would the food cooked in this way really taste good? Every customer has a different taste. Won't the customers be disgusted if they decide the taste of the dishes without asking? Miles thought with a frown. The most popular thing about his restaurant was that it was able to make food that was suitable for their tastes. Because of this, the restaurant did not have any representative delicacies, but because of this, it had a group of regular customers and business was good. However, although everyone had doubts in their hearts, they remained silent. Commenting on other people's dishes in other people's restaurants was a bad behavior. It could be regarded as a troublemaker. As a chef, this was a very important point. Vichenio seemed to have felt the gazes from the side. He raised his head and looked at the uncles and aunties who were looking at him. He moved the fried rice closer to him and said helplessly, "Uncles and aunties, can you not stare at me like this? I will panic." "Don't panic. We are just looking. We won't rob you," Andrew said with a silly smile. The fat on his body shook, and he was very intimidating. "Then do as you please." Vichenio withdrew his gaze. The words of this strong man who could hold down an adult pig by himself did not comfort him at all. However, his stomach was growling. He could not help but pick up the spoon and put a spoonful of Yeongju fried rice into his mouth. "It's delicious." Vichenio's eyes suddenly lit up. He felt the delicious taste spread in his mouth. The taste of all kinds of ingredients mixed together was so special and delicious that he was a little intoxicated. After swallowing, it turned into a warm current and slid down his throat. The decadent cells in his body seemed to be slowly waking up. It was like the spring rain brushing over the land after a long drought, gentle and comfortable. The tiredness in his body disappeared by more than half, and a trace of color returned to his pale face. Even the strength in his hands recovered a little. It's really effective. It's even more effective than those folk recipes. And the taste is so delicious. No wonder my wife couldn't stop eating in the morning. Vichenio's eyes were wide open. He looked at the Yeongju fried rice in front of him with surprise. He put another spoonful into his mouth and chewed happily. One spoonful after another, he could not stop at all. He was completely absorbed in the fried rice in front of him. His face was full of joy, and he completely ignored the onlookers around him. Gulp. The onlookers who had been staring at Vichenio from the beginning to the end could not help but swallow their saliva. Is it really that good? The same thought floated in everyone's mind at the same time. However, when they saw the Yeongju fried rice decreasing under Vichenio's spoon, they could not take their eyes off it. Those who had not eaten it could only imagine the taste in their minds. The more they looked, the hungrier they became. As the dishes were served one after another, the aroma of Rujiamo and Yeongju fried rice began to float in the air. The customers who were waiting in line to order began to stir. However, The half-dragon waiter had been ordering and serving the dishes according to the order they entered the restaurant from the beginning to the end. He had not made a single mistake. Moreover, he had maintained a comfortable smile on his face. The customers who were waiting in line had nothing to say. "What's this?" The onlookers looked at the Ruggiamo that the customer at the next table had just received. "Isn't it just a piece of meat sandwiched between two pancakes? And it's minced. Is it really that good?" Andrew was even more puzzled. If the Yangju fried rice could be said to be exquisite, shouldn't the mixture of pancakes and meat be very strange? The smell of the meat is so special. "Have any of you made this kind of meat before?" Bernice could not help but ask in a low voice. The aroma was more impactful than the previous Yangju fried rice, and it immediately aroused her appetite. As a customer, she might only want to eat as soon as possible. However, as the owner and head chef of the restaurant, she cared more about how such appetizing meat was made. "Fried pork chops don't taste like this." Andrew shook his head. "Roasted pork chops don't taste like this." The old lady behind him also shook her head. "Boiled pork chops don't taste like this either." Miles also frowned. "Why do I feel that the owner is using a completely different cooking method to cook? Could it be that these are all his innovations?" The bald man could not help but ridicule. "Ha, innovation? Over the years, there have been so many chefs who opened restaurants and tried to innovate. In the end, they all closed down their restaurants. I think the owner is just fooling around. Now these customers are coming to support him because of the novelty, but in a few days, no one will want to eat his dishes anymore." Bai Xiaopu sneered, appearing to be somewhat disdainful. Chapter 148. After saying that, the customer took a big bite of the Ruggiamo as a show of force. As he chewed, he praised, "I won't get tired of eating such delicious Ruggiamo for the rest of my life. It's delicious." The air suddenly fell silent, and the visitors all turned their heads to look away, as if they didn't know him. Not only did he sneak into other people's restaurants to eat, but he was also discovered by other customers. More importantly, after he was heard bad-mouthing the owner didn't say anything, but the customer jumped out and slapped him in the face. Moreover, this was a customer who had eaten in both restaurants. This feeling was a little painful. Bai Xiaopu also blushed. His thin and crispy onion pancakes were one of the most famous snacks in the Aden Square. The year before last, they had even made it into the top 100 of the Aden Square food rankings. Although they were at the bottom, they were still on the rankings. Now, this customer was saying that his Ruggiamo was far inferior to his Ruggiamo, and even disdaining to be mentioned in the same breath. Bai Xiaopu's blood boiled, and he couldn't help but fly into a rage. Beside him, Miles tugged at Bai Xiaopu's sleeve, and comforted him in a soft voice, "Old man, we're here to eat, not to cause trouble. Bear with it." If they really quarreled, it wouldn't look good for everyone's face. Although they were all competitors when doing business, not many of them would really fall out with each other. Quarreling with other people's customers in other people's restaurants was something that couldn't be done. Bai Xiaopu was naturally aware of the pros and cons. After all, he was a wily old fox who had been doing business for decades. He took 2 deep breaths to calm himself down, and then turned his head away with a soft snort. He didn't argue. The customer was just saying that casually, and didn't continue to argue. He focused on eating the Ruggiamo in his hand. He had only said that because he was a little annoyed that the owner of the restaurant was slandering Mr. Mac. As the line slowly moved forward, some regulars would occasionally recognize these owners, and they would all greet them. They were all a little curious as to why these people weren't doing business in their restaurants, but had come to line up in their restaurants. Actually, us old guys had a get-together, and we didn't know which restaurant to eat at, so we chose this popular one to try. Miles laughed dryly as he explained to one of the regulars. If he had known that he would meet so many regulars, he wouldn't have chosen this time to come. "Hello, what would you like to order?" Yabemia also noticed this group of visitors. Although he was a little wary of them and worried that they were here to cause trouble, he still smiled and walked over with the menu. Hiss. A plate of Yangju fried rice costs 600 copper coins. 300 copper coins for a Ruggiamo. Is there something wrong with your menu? The old lady looked at the menu and immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. Her voice also became louder as she stared at Yarbemia. Yeah, why is it so expensive? The others looked at the prices written on the menu and felt a little incredulous. 600 copper coins could buy half a roast suckling pig at the Friar Tavern. It was the Friar Tavern's signature dish and ranked 6th on the Aden Square's gourmet rankings. However, in this restaurant, they could only buy a small plate of Yangju fried rice, and they didn't find any diced meat in it. As for 300 copper coins for a Ruggiamo, Bishop's onion pancakes only cost 5 copper coins each. Compared to this, the difference was like heaven and earth. The most expensive dish in their restaurant was less than 200 copper coins, and the dishes that cost more than 100 copper coins were all main dishes. Who would dare to buy a plate of Yangju fried rice and a pancake for hundreds of copper coins? They would probably be smashed on the first day of opening. Isn't this a scam? Everyone looked at Yarbemia, waiting for her to give an explanation. Or could she tell that they were the owners of other restaurants, and deliberately used the price to scare them off? Sorry, sir, there's nothing wrong with the menu. The prices are the same for all the dishes in the restaurant. All the customers are the same. Yarbemia shook her head and smiled. Too many customers had questioned the prices these days, and she was a little used to it. However, she still explained with a smile. Those who thought the prices were too expensive would leave, while those who could accept the prices would stay and try them. As long as the customers stayed, they were conquered by the delicious food in the restaurant. This made Yarbemia very happy, and she admired Meg more and more. However, she still didn't know the intentions of these restaurant owners. If they were here to stir up trouble, she was afraid that they would cause trouble for her. If that happened, she wouldn't know how to deal with them. If it was a fight, she felt that she could beat all of them, but she wasn't very good at arguing. But your prices? The old lady raised her eyebrows and wanted to say something. Since everyone's prices are the same, I'll take a plate of Yangju fried rice and a Ruggiamo, Andrew said directly. He then looked at the old lady and said, Mrs. Virgin, every restaurant's price is free. Customers can choose to eat or not to eat. I'll take one of each. Bernice nodded. She didn't want to continue arguing about the price. As Andrew said, since so many customers chose to eat at such a high price, it meant that they thought the food was worth the price. As for whether these people were hired by the restaurant owners, Bernice's gaze lingered on the grey temple magician who was eating a plate of Yangju fried rice. No one would hire a magician from the grey temple to be a hired help, let alone a magician who seemed to have a high status. After a moment of silence, Bishop nodded and said, I'll take a Ruggiamo. I'm not eating. I'll take a Ruggiamo. I've worked for nothing today. The old lady stomped her feet and turned to leave. Everyone looked at each other and felt a little helpless, but they didn't say anything. The business of Mrs. Virgin's restaurant was getting worse and worse. In the past few years, the old lady's tongue had some problems, and her sense of taste had deteriorated a lot. Back then, the mutton soup had been in the top 50 of the gourmet rankings. It was a childhood memory of many people, and they hadn't tasted it for a long time. Mrs. Virgin's son and daughter-in-law had died of illness a few years ago. She had a disappointing grandson who had been fooling around outside. In the past 2 years, Mrs. Virgin had pulled him by the ear and only agreed to help a little in the restaurant. However, he had no talent in cooking, and the mutton soup he made tasted worse and worse. Only some of the poor old lady's regular customers would come to drink a bowl. Sometimes, the taste would be better if they were lucky, but most of the time, very few people could finish a bowl. Life was not easy for them. The others also took their orders one after another. Yarbemia took down everyone's orders and asked with a smile, Okay, but it's best to eat the Yangju fried rice cooked. But there are no seats in the restaurant right now. Should I bring the Ruggiamo up first? It's okay. Let's wait a little longer. We'll serve it together when there are seats available, Bernice said. The others nodded and didn't have any objections. Since they were here to taste, of course they had to sit down and taste it carefully. Chapter 149. Don't worry. They won't be able to make a scene. Meg shook his head with a smile. He had seen how Yarbemia negotiated with them, and he could tell that they were reasonable people. They were probably curious about how the restaurant could attract so many customers, and wanted to learn from it. Of course, if they really wanted to make a scene, he wasn't worried at all. Julian and Crassus didn't even need to show up. Amy alone would be enough to make them suffer. Besides, they probably just wanted to learn from the restaurant's booming business. Mag didn't take this level of tasting to heart. Once his restaurant became more popular and famous throughout the Aden Square, Chaos City, and even the entire Norland continent, there would most likely be more chefs with ulterior motives coming to his door and trying to learn how to cook from him. Just serve them as usual. I think they'll like it. Meg nodded. He took a plate from the side and put the Yangju fried rice on it, and gestured for Yarbemia to take it away. Oh, okay. Yarbemia hurried to take the fried rice away. Seeing Meg so calm and composed, a confident smile appeared on her face again as if she had found her backbone. She didn't believe that anyone could make such delicious food like Mr. Mac, not even those who had tasted it before. She had been helping out in the kitchen for so many years, but most of the ingredients and condiments that Mag used were things that she had never seen before, and some of them were things that she had never heard of being used in a dish. Mr. Mac was a genius. He used all kinds of unimaginable methods to make all kinds of delicious food. It was as if his hands were magic. No ordinary chef could compare with him. Little Amy, are you still hungry? Do you want to eat more? It's my treat. Carrot smiled at Amy with a spoon in one hand. At the same time, he glanced at Julian with a smug look. Julian had promised in the morning that he would cover all 3 meals for Amy when she attended classes with him, 3 days a week. This was not a small sum of money. Now, he was deliberately bringing up this topic to annoy him. As expected, Julian gave him a sideways glance. The spoon in his hand was covered in a layer of frost. No need, I'm already full. Amy shook her head and looked at Crassus with a cute smile on her face. But Master Halfbeard, if you really want to treat me to a meal, then I'll have to trouble you to treat me to 3 meals when I'm in your class. The smile on Crassus's face suddenly froze. He had only wanted to tease Julian a little, but he didn't expect to get himself into this mess. Amy had accepted it so naturally that for a moment, he felt like he should have just nodded. Little Amy, if you're hungry in the future, we can have supper together. I'll take care of everything. A faint smile appeared on Urian's face, and even his coarse voice was tinged with a hint of elation. He was looking at Urian with a gloating expression. Okay. Thank you, Master Turtle. Amy nodded happily. Then, she turned her gaze to Crassus and waited for his answer. Okay, then I'll take care of all your meals when you attend classes with me. Crassus sighed and nodded helplessly. What could he do? He had met such a cute disciple who knew how to save money for her father. Of course, he could only agree to such conditions. Anyway, there's so much money piled up that it's about to go moldy. If we eat together, we probably won't be able to finish it even in 100 years. Crassus thought for a moment. For the past 100 years, he had casually thrown the monthly allowance that the royal family had given him into a large room. A few years ago, Arthur had reminded him that the room was full, so he had to find a bigger room. Furthermore, he had replaced all of the money from decades ago with new gold coins. It was said that some of the out-of-print gold coins had been sold for a lot of money. He didn't know exactly how much money he had earned, but it was most likely a lot. He was going to write a letter to Arthur later and ask him to bring the money over. With such a disciple, he would have a lot of money to spend in the future. Master Halfbeard, you're so nice, Amy said happily. She sat on a high stool and swung her little legs happily, causing Ugly Duckling, who had just fallen asleep on her lap, to sway from side to side. It opened its eyes and looked at her with a hint of resentment. Amy stopped swinging her legs and leaned over to look at Ugly Duckling with a serious expression. Ugly Duckling, do you have a problem with me? Meow tilde Ugly Duckling immediately shook its head with an extremely sincere look in its eyes. Do you have a problem with me? Of course not. You can tell me if you have a problem with me. If you don't say anything, how am I supposed to know that you have a problem with me? Amy continued with a serious expression. Meow. A hint of hesitation appeared in Ugly Duckling's eyes, as if it were considering the credibility of Amy's words. Amy's expression became even more sincere as she continued, "If you say something and I think it makes sense, then I'll definitely change. I'm a good baby who knows when she's wrong." Meow tilde ugly duckling hesitated momentarily before pointing at Amy's little legs. It then made a shaking gesture with its little paws, shook its head vigorously, and made a sleeping pose as it looked at Amy with anticipation in its big, sapphire-like eyes. "Ugly duckling, I knew you had a problem with me. Admit it now." Amy stroked Ugly Duckling's head with elation at the sight of its soft face changing shape in her hands. Meow. Ugly Duckling wore a resigned expression. This world was full of tricks. Amy didn't stop until she had a good time. She cupped Ugly Duckling's face with her hands, and earnestly said, "It's impossible for you not to shake your legs. If you don't like it, then go lie down on the ground." Ugly Duckling looked at the ground, then at Amy's little legs. It cowardly curled up again, and fell asleep as Amy shook her legs. The customers generally ate very quickly. After all, most of the time they couldn't control their spoons in front of such delicious food. Furthermore, the restaurant only served Yeongju fried rice and rujiamo, so the long line was quickly shortening. Many customers ate rujiamos on the way after receiving them. It was said that eating while walking was a special experience. Grandpa Scallion Pancake, Uncle Fat Pork Chop, Auntie Flowery Apron. As the line shortened, Amy's eyes lit up as she looked at the visitors who were walking up to her. She actually gave each of them a nickname. Everyone was also stunned. On one hand, they had received a strange nickname out of nowhere. On the other hand, they were even more surprised that this half-elf girl knew them. Although the nicknames were strange, they did have something to do with them. They looked at each other and felt that the nicknames were very appropriate. But this girl seems to be the restaurant owner's daughter, right? Chapter 150. Everyone was stunned for a moment, and their expressions suddenly became a little strange. It was fine if they were recognized by the customers, and they could be fooled easily. Now, they were directly recognized by the boss's daughter, and she directly asked them if they were here to cause trouble. For a moment, they didn't know how to answer. Amy's words immediately attracted everyone's attention. Originally, not many people had noticed the visitors, but Amy's words woke them up. The scallion pancakes and pork chops were all famous dishes in the Aden Square, so they immediately remembered who the owners of these restaurants were. Looks of confusion and curiosity appeared on their faces. Are they really here to cause trouble like Amy said? Crassus and Julian also turned to look at them. If someone dared to cause trouble in their presence, then they must be looking down on them. Brandley was also looking at the group of people with a hint of surprise in his eyes. He wanted to see who it was that dared to wreak havoc in this restaurant. "I used to watch your restaurant a lot. The pork chops must be super delicious, right? The onion pancakes also smell very good." Amy nodded. However, her expression soon changed, and she looked at everyone with a scrutinizing gaze. "But why are you here at my restaurant today? If you're here to eat, of course you're welcome. Father's rainbow fried rice and rujiamo are super delicious. But if you're here to cause trouble, then I won't allow it." Amy is super fierce when she's angry. Amy's tone changed, and she clenched her little fists in front of her face. She tried her best to bare her teeth as she spoke with a serious expression. "Phut. So cute." Penny looked at Amy, who was trying hard to pretend to be fierce, and laughed out loud. Her eyes were like little moons. Her son and daughter were almost adults, and they were outside every day. It had been a long time since she saw such a cute little guy, and she suddenly felt a bit of motherly love. We're not here to cause trouble." Andrew waved his hand a little clumsily. He looked at Amy, and he didn't know what to do. The little one was indeed very cute, and she even praised his fried pork chops. Although her nickname was a little strange, it wasn't unacceptable. He just didn't know how to explain why they were here together. "Well, little girl, we're here to eat, not to cause trouble." Miles calmed down a lot, and shook his head with a smile. "Really?" Amy was still a little doubtful, but she slowly lowered her little hand and nodded. "Then eat obediently." Everyone nodded and heaved a sigh of relief. They felt more pressured under this little girl's gaze than under the gaze of the owner. Sorry, she's still young and doesn't know much. Please forgive her. At this time, Meg came out with a bowl of Yangju fried rice and put it in front of the customers at the next table. He reached out and touched Amy's head. He smiled at Andrew and the others, but his tone and expression didn't seem to blame Amy at all. They were all in the same business, and they came together. He didn't believe that they didn't have any hostility or snooping. However, he didn't hit a smiling person. If they didn't cause trouble, he wouldn't say anything. Amy's words were a little warning, and also represented his attitude. Of course, they could come to eat, and they would pay anyway. Besides, they were a new wave of customers. Meg was happy to see this, but if they wanted to cause trouble, he wouldn't be a nice guy. Millimeter. Amy rubbed her head against Mag's palm and stopped talking. How could that be? Little girl is too cute. Bernice sized up Mag. He was about 30 years old and a little thin, but he was in good spirits. His eyes were clear and bright, and he was wearing a set of simple and clean black and white clothes with a black apron around his neck. He looked very clean and tidy, completely different from the greasy chefs of other restaurants. Boss, we're all restaurant owners in the Aden Square. We saw that your business was the best, so we thought we'd come to eat together and try out what kind of food could attract so many customers. I don't mean anything else. I hope you don't misunderstand. Myers looked at Meg with a smile. He was about 40 years old, and he was quite generous. Meg looked at Myers. He was about 40 years old, of medium build, and wore a well-tailored black shirt. His hair was combed up meticulously, and he looked like a person who paid attention to details. He nodded with a smile and said, "Welcome. Please take a seat. Your dishes will be served soon." There were 2 tables nearby that were about to leave. He signaled for them to sit down, and then he turned and walked into the kitchen. The customers had thought that a conflict was going to break out, but they didn't think that things would be resolved so peacefully. There wasn't even a verbal confrontation. They were slightly disappointed, and turned away to continue enjoying their meal. This boss seems to be quite easy to talk to. Bernice sat down and brushed the hair in front of her forehead with a smile. Even though she was close to 40 years old, her skin was well maintained, and she looked quite gentle. It was just that her hands were a little rough and calloused from constantly soaking in water and holding a knife. Yeah, I didn't have this kind of temperament when I was your age. Bishop nodded, and he was a little embarrassed. He had just been teased by a customer, and he had almost lost his temper. If he were to see a bunch of other chefs suddenly come to his door, he would probably come out of the kitchen with a kitchen knife in his hand. Even now, you don't have that kind of patience, the bald man said with a smile. Everyone smiled knowingly upon hearing this. Old man Bishop's temper was as fiery as ever, and he kept his 3 sons under strict control. However, it was also because of this that the old man had become a boss who didn't have to do anything himself. Any of his 3 sons could take care of things on their own. Who said that? Bishop's face reddened, but they were all old friends who had known each other for a decade or 2, so he didn't say anything. Little girl, are you Amy? Bernice turned to look at Amy and asked with a smile. Yeah. Amy nodded and looked at Bernice with interest. She asked curiously, Auntie Floral Apron, where's your floral apron? I took it off before I came. I don't need to wear an apron when I'm not cooking. Bernice smiled at Amy. This little girl's memory was really good. She thought for a moment and said, then, little Amy, do you like floral aprons? If you do, I can give you a small floral apron. Okay. Then Amy can wear it when she learns to cook from Lord Father in the future. Amy clapped her little hands happily. Chapter 151. Sure, keep your voice down. That's a green-eyed magic snake. 1 magic core is worth 20 Rugiamos. In a swamp, Sargeras gently parted the grass, and pointed at a 3-meter-long green python in the swamp in front of him. His eyes were filled with excitement. 20 Rugiamos. Keel's and Mon's eyes lit up at the same time, and their breathing quickened. One of them was holding a big bag, and the other was holding a rough black iron rod. They were in the dark forest swamp, about 20 miles south of Chaos City. This area was actually divided into the territory of the giant dragons. Apart from the dark forest swamp, the silent hills, the abyss of darkness, Stranglethorn Vale, and so on were all intricately distributed in this area. There were all kinds of terrifying magic beasts, herbs, and wild animals that couldn't be found anywhere else. Giant dragons were relatively few in number. Most of them lived on distant dragon islands, and traveled by flying. Therefore, they didn't bother to clean up the dangerous areas between Chaos City and themselves. Instead, they treated these areas as natural barriers. These intersecting forbidden areas couldn't be crossed unless one had great power and a flying mount. Because of this, the area south of Chaos City had become a paradise for mercenaries, adventurers, and adventurers. Every day, the Chaos Guild would receive countless bounty missions from all over the continent. The missions on the bounty list ranged from the head of a giant golden dragon to certain herbs. High difficulty corresponded to high rewards. It was said that the reward for the head of a giant golden dragon was as high as 100 million copper coins. Some of the lowest level missions to find ingredients and herbs could be as low as 10 copper coins. Most of these missions didn't require one to enter the depths. They could be found in the outskirts, but they were more complicated, and were suitable for the weak and adventurers. Boss, we already have 12 Rugiamos in the bag. With this, we'll have enough for dinner tonight and tomorrow, Mond said with a silly smile. He carried the heavy bag as if it were a treasure. They were already in the depths of the dark forest swamp, surrounded by black poisonous fog. Normal species wouldn't dare to enter this area without protection. However, there was a layer of faint red flames dancing on the surface of Sargeras and the other two. The poisonous mist was kept 5 centimeters away from them, and couldn't get any closer. Don't let your guard down. The devil green-eyed snake is best at escaping. If it burrows into the ground, we won't be able to catch it. Sargeras said seriously, you two surround it from both sides. I'll heat up the swamp with boiling lava so that it can't drill into the ground. Then I'll use crazy meteorite to block its escape route. You two put a sack on it and beat it up. Remember, don't kill it. If you catch it alive, the reward will be increased by half. That's 30 Rugiamos. But boss, didn't you say that the green-eyed devil snake was hard to deal with? Wouldn't it be too simple if we just put a gunny sack over it? Mond said hesitantly as he touched his big bald head. Are you stupid? I said it was hard to deal with. That thing's most powerful thing is its eyes. If you're stared at by it for 3 seconds, you'll be trapped in its illusion. Everything will be fine as long as you put a gunny sack over it. It won't even be poisonous. Sargeras patted Mond's head and urged, hurry up. After this, we have to go to the next place and try our luck to see if we can run into that green-eyed wolf again. I couldn't stop it last time. Its fur is worth 100 Rugiamos. Okay. Hearing that, Keel and Mond's eyes lit up. They put down the gunny sacks in their hands, took out new ones, and walked to the 2 sides of the swamp with bent backs. As a warrior of the lava tribe, he was able to survive in an environment like the Demon Island. He was a natural hunter. Moving silently, he quickly found a good spot. The 3 of them looked at the green-eyed devil snake, who was still resting in the swamp, and nodded at the same time. Sargeras gently pressed his hands on the ground, and the lava patterns on his hands suddenly lit up. 2 balls of fire surged into the ground from his hands, and the red lava surged toward the green-eyed demon snake at a speed visible to the naked eye. The entire ground seemed to have been dyed red by the lava, and fiery red cracks lit up. The swamp almost boiled in an instant. The green-eyed demon snake immediately stood up on its hind legs with a hint of bewilderment in its green eyes. It quickly sensed the sudden rise in temperature underground, and Sargeras, who had appeared 10 meters away from it, and flicked its red forked tongue provocatively before turning to leave. In the name of Sargeras, I summon the meteorite. Sargeras chanted. Suddenly, the sky above the swamp turned crimson like boiling lava. Fireballs the size of a human head fell from the sky with long tails in the direction that the green-eyed devil snake wanted to leave. Now, Sargeras strode toward the green-eyed devil snake, and roared, for Rugiamos. For Rugiamos. Keel and Mond roared at the same time. Although there were only 3 of them, Their roars carried a sense of heroism and solemnity as if they were facing death with equanimity. The green-eyed devil snake dodged the meteorite falling from the sky. Its green eyes flashed as it tried to find its target. However, before it could find it, a gunny sack fell from the sky. Its vision went black, and it was knocked unconscious by a series of angry roars. "Boss, it's done. 30 Ruggiamos," Mond said excitedly to Sargeras as he tied up the gunny sack. "Very good." Sargeras couldn't hide his joy. He nodded with satisfaction. "Our Burning Legion's first expedition is indeed impressive. For Ruggiamos." Mond raised the gunny sack high, his face full of joy. "When our army continues to grow, perhaps we'll be able to target that golden dragon one day. That's enough meat for us to eat for many years," Keel said with a hint of anticipation in his voice. He was also unable to contain his excitement. Sargeras pointed forward with a smile. "It's my responsibility to help my people eat Ruggiamos." He laughed heartily. "Burning Legion, let's go." The 3 figures carrying gunny sacks gradually disappeared into the depths of the swamp. Discussions about Ruggiamos could still be heard from time to time. Is this Ruggiamo really that good? In the restaurant, the visitors looked at the Ruggiamos in their hands with wide eyes. The rich aroma of meat made them swallow involuntarily. The back of a half-elf girl printed on the paper bag attracted everyone's attention. It was Amy's back. Everyone who did business in the Aiden Square knew that half-elves were taboo. They didn't expect Meg to use them as the logo of the restaurant, and even use a half-dragon as a waiter. This was the only restaurant in the Aiden Square that dared to do so. Chapter 152. Bernice and the others all looked at him. Andrew dealt with pork every day, and the meat in this Ruggiamo was pork. He was one of the most qualified people to speak about Ruggiamo. Andrew chewed carefully after taking a bite of half of the Ruggiamo. Only the outermost layer of the Ruggiamo was a little crispy. It was soft and chewy, and the sweet taste melted in his mouth. What was more amazing was that some gravy had seeped into the bread, which made the original sweet taste more distinct. "Is this really the gravy made from pork?" Andrew's heart was full of surprise. He had been dealing with pork for more than 20 years, and he knew the taste of every piece of pork. He also knew the various cooking methods of pork, but he had never tasted such a distinctive and special gravy. The meat was very fragrant, but the rank odor of the pork had been perfectly removed. He didn't know what spices had condensed and amplified the flavor of the meat, but it exploded on the tip of his tongue and awakened his taste buds. After biting off the outer layer of the bread, the soft meat melted in his mouth. It was a mixture of fat and lean meat, but it didn't feel greasy at all. It fell apart with a gentle bite. "How can streaky pork taste like this? It's incredible." Andrew's eyes widened. He had been worried that the streaky pork would be too greasy and he wouldn't be used to it. But now it seemed that his worry was completely unnecessary. With a bite, the delicious gravy overflowed. It was swallowed together with a somewhat violent aura. Every taste bud was trembling, and the warm feeling gradually turned into a burning sensation. It slid down his throat and quickly spread to his limbs and bones. It was as if every piece of his flesh was trembling along with it. "Ah!" Andrew couldn't help but open his mouth and let out a long exclamation. Even the fat on his body couldn't help but tremble. However, his fat wasn't as exaggerated as Harrison's. Most of the fat on his body was still muscles big enough to hold down an adult pig, so the trembling wasn't exaggerated. "How is it?" The visitors all looked at Andrew and asked. After all, he was the owner of a famous restaurant. How could he make such an exaggerated reaction on the first bite? If they hadn't come with him, they would have thought that he was an actor. "Delicious." Andrew replied simply. His eyes never left the Ruggiamo. Savoring the taste of the meat in his mouth, he took a big bite of the Ruggiamo. The delicious taste wreaked havoc in his mouth, and his blood boiled in his body. This was definitely not ordinary pork. Andrew was 100% sure, but it didn't matter. When tasting such delicacies, all he needed to do was to put his heart and soul into it. One mouthful after another, the Ruggiamo quickly disappeared in his mouth. Everyone in the tour group looked at Andrew in disbelief. This kind of behavior would only be displayed after eating a delicacy that one liked. It seemed that he really liked it. He didn't even bother to comment on it. Is it really that good? Bai Xiaopu muttered in disbelief. He picked up the Ruggiamo and took a bite. In his eyes, his scallion pancakes represented the best pancake delicacies in the Aden Square. Even though it was a pity that his pancakes hadn't made it onto the Aden Square's Aden 100 Aden Square food rankings, he was still able to sell over 1,000 pancakes every day. After taking a bite and chewing carefully, Bai Xiaopu's eyes widened. How can there be such delicious pancakes? The soft and sweet pancake and the delicious pork were perfectly blended together. They were supposed to be two completely different things, but when they were put together, they actually complemented each other so well. His pancakes with the slight fragrance of spring onions could not be compared at all. The difference between the two was even greater than the difference in thickness between the two pancakes. They were on completely different levels of food. This kind of disparity made one feel despair. Bai Xiaopu was a little dejected that his favorite dish had been crushed, but he still couldn't help but exclaim in admiration after swallowing his first mouthful of Ruggiamo. The sudden surge of hot blood made him feel a little younger. He didn't know what Meg had put in the meat to create such a miraculous effect. When he was young, he definitely wouldn't have been satisfied with the scallion pancakes that his restaurant only sold now. He had modified and made the scallion pancakes from other people's hard pancakes. He thought back to the past few years. Under his guidance, his 3 sons had completely mastered the art of making scallion pancakes. Each of them had reached the point of perfection and could take charge of their own business. However, whenever they had any thoughts of changing their minds, he would immediately extinguish them. At the very least, he would give them a scolding, and at the very worst, he would directly take a stick. Therefore, apart from his 3rd son, his eldest and 2nd sons had completely settled down. They only thought about making scallion pancakes every day. There's always someone better than you. It seems that it's time for my 3rd son to try it himself. Bai Xiaopu looked at the Ruggiamo in his hand with a complicated expression. Under the impact of such a delicious dish, he had to admit that, just as the customer had said, the scallion pancakes weren't competitive at all except for the price. Of course, the price of the scallion pancakes was also the most competitive. Customers who could afford Ruggiamo for every meal generally wouldn't come to eat scallion pancakes every day. As for the Ruggiamo's price of 300 copper coins, was it expensive? Bai Xiaopu asked himself. If he could make such a delicious Ruggiamo with such a miraculous effect, let alone 300, 400, or 600 copper coins, he might even put it on the menu. It's really delicious. Bai Xiaopu looked at the crowd and said. He also lowered his head and continued to eat the Ruggiamo with a joyful and enjoyable smile on his face. It was indeed a pleasure to eat such a delicious dish. They had wanted to wait for old master Bai Xiaopu, who was an expert in making pancakes, to express his opinion, but seeing that he was completely intoxicated, the others didn't wait any longer. They all picked up their Ruggiamos and took a bite at the same time. Everyone had different expressions on their faces. Some were pleasantly surprised, some were joyful, and some were shocked. However, they all let out a long sigh of admiration almost at the same time. Previously, they had thought that Andrew and Bai Xiaopu were exaggerating, but after tasting it themselves, they realized that it was completely a spontaneous reaction of their bodies. They couldn't control it at all. How can this Ruggiamo be so delicious? This is the best pancake I've ever eaten. No, there's also meat. Bernice couldn't help but exclaim as she looked at the Ruggiamo in her hand. Chapter 153. Definitely. Not to mention the top 10, I think we can make it to the top 5. Bernice nodded and took another bite. She was a little embarrassed by her sigh, but fortunately, everyone was in the same state. They were all intoxicated by the food in their hands and didn't notice her. Although she was also a chef and a restaurant owner, she had to admit that the Ruggiamo was amazing to her. 300 copper coins wasn't cheap, but it was undeniable that such a subversive taste was worth the price. She couldn't even understand how this white biscuit was made to be so soft and delicious, yet also a bit chewy. If it was baked, how could it be made to only have a thin layer of crispness on the surface, which improved the taste by another layer? What was even more amazing was the meat in the pancake. It was obviously streaky pork with fat. Many people would shave off the fat to avoid being greasy. However, Meg didn't do that. No one knew what kind of cooking method he used, or what kind of spices and seasonings he added, but the streaky pork didn't feel greasy at all. The flavors of all kinds of spices and seasonings had penetrated deeply into the meat. The presence of the fat neutralized the softness of the lean meat and enhanced the taste to a whole new level. The combination of the sweet and soft pancake and the delicious meat completely subverted everyone's ideas about cooking. How is the pancake made? What are the spices in the meat? How is the meat made? Questions popped up in everyone's minds, and they all wanted to ask Meg. In terms of taste, it can definitely make it to the top 5. If the dishes weren't so simple, it could even compete with the top 3, Miles said with a smile. Hearing Bernice's words, Miles shook his head and said with a smile, the monthly Aiden Square food rankings are based on customer reviews. The number of customers also affects the rankings. The price of the dishes determines the level of the customers, and the size of the restaurant limits the number of customers. It can't be compared with those restaurants that sell thousands of servings of the same food in a day. Miles is right. The number of customers will limit him from making it to the top 5, but I think he can break all the records. It's been a long time since a dish with over 1,000 reviews appeared in the Aiden Square, right? Andrew put down the empty bag in his hand and said with a silly smile, it's been a long time since I've eaten something so delicious. Waiter, give me another Ruggiamo. I'll have another one too, Bishop said. Okay, please wait a moment. Yarbemia nodded with a smile, unable to hide the joy and pride in her eyes. Indeed, even a chef or a restaurant owner would be addicted to Mr. Mac's food, unable to resist the taste. Hee, I knew they would like it. Amy smiled happily as she reached out to pinch Ugly Duckling's face, and pulled it back from her lap. This reaction seems to be a little stronger than expected. Meg turned around and looked out of the kitchen. He smiled and shook his head. He thought that these people would leave quietly after eating. He didn't expect them to start a seminar. He was a little embarrassed. However, after listening for a while, Meg couldn't help but frown. He whispered to himself, all 5-star reviews? What the hell is the Aiden Square food competition? Why does it sound like a popular review? Is there a benefit to being on this list? Why do these people care so much about it? All 5-star reviews? No way. Every dish has its likes and dislikes. No matter how delicious this Ruggiamo is, it can't be all 5-star reviews, right? Bishop shook his head in disbelief. 5 is already a high score. Customers nowadays are getting more and more picky, and they are demanding more and more from the dining experience. This restaurant doesn't have sections, and humans, dwarfs, and orcs all have to share tables. There's no way it can get full marks in the customer experience category. Bernice also shook her head in disagreement with Andrew's words. Mr. Mac's Ruggiamo is indeed the most delicious. Even Mrs. Bernice agrees. She used to say that the food in her restaurant was the most exquisite. The most exquisite? That's because she hasn't tasted Mr. Mac's Yeongju fried rice yet. That's the most exquisite food I've ever tasted. I love to see these bosses, who are usually so arrogant, act like they don't know anything. The customers sitting next to them were also whispering to each other, and they didn't forget to tease the group. Everyone's expression was a little strange. They didn't expect to be surrounded and ridiculed by a group of onlookers, but they couldn't refute it. Every word was reasonable. Auntie Flowery Apron, isn't my father's Ruggiamo super delicious? Amy looked at Bernice and asked expectantly. Yes, it's super delicious. Bernice nodded with a smile. Her praise came from the bottom of her heart. And the rainbow fried rice is also super delicious. I think you'll like it too, Amy recommended sincerely. Here's your Yeongju fried rice. Please enjoy. Yarbemia just came out with 2 plates of Yeongju fried rice, and she placed them in front of Andrew and Bernice. The bright color made Bernice's eyes light up. The aroma of eggs mixed with other ingredients rushed to her face. The golden eggs perfectly wrapped the rice grains, and the grains were distinct without any adhesion. In addition to the eggs and rice, there were 6 different ingredients, each of which was cut into the size of a grain of rice. They were evenly mixed in the plate, and indeed looked like a rainbow from the sky, chopped up and fried. So many ingredients were mixed together, but there was no adhesion at all. It was as exquisite as a plate. Even Bernice, who was a restaurant selling point, felt a little ashamed of her inferiority. The owner cut the peas and river shrimp into such uniform grains. "His knife skills are amazing," Bernice exclaimed. She picked up the spoon and scooped a spoonful of rice into her mouth. After chewing a few times, she couldn't help but close her eyes. The delicious taste of eggs, ham, tree mushrooms. The flavors of all the ingredients were perfectly blended in her mouth. When she tasted it carefully, the taste of each ingredient was so distinct, and it maintained its original taste. After swallowing, a warm current spread in her body. It wasn't as violent as the Ruggiamo, but more like a gentle breeze and drizzle. It softly soothed the restlessness that had been aroused before and moistened her body. The comfortable feeling made Bernice smile. Compared with the blood-boiling Ruggiamo, she preferred the warm and comfortable Yangju fried rice, which made her feel like she was enjoying a delicious meal. Chapter 154. Is it really that good? Andrew murmured suspiciously, looking at Bernice, who was eating the Yangju fried rice quietly with a face full of happiness. Then he scooped a big spoonful into his mouth. After finishing the Ruggiamo, everyone was waiting for the new dish to be served. At this moment, their attention was completely attracted by the two of them. Looking at Bernice's table manners, they couldn't help but swallow their saliva. Bernice was always picky when eating. She didn't eat anything that was too strong or too oily. It was rare to see such an expression of enjoyment on her face, not even when she was eating the Ruggiamo. Could it be that this Yangju fried rice is better than Ruggiamo? With doubts in their hearts, everyone turned to look at Andrew, wondering what he would say after eating. After finishing the Ruggiamo, Andrew still felt that the blood in his body couldn't calm down. His body seemed to have undergone some miraculous changes, and his strength had increased a little. He didn't know if it was an illusion or not. His strength had increased after eating a Ruggiamo. This sounded a little mysterious, and even made him think that it might be an illusion, so he didn't take it seriously. Andrew's eyes lit up as soon as he swallowed a big mouthful of Yangju fried rice. He was a little worried that with so many ingredients mixed together, the taste might be mixed. But after he put the fried rice into his mouth, his worries were completely unnecessary. The flavors of all the ingredients were perfectly blended, and the taste was delicious and mild. The salty ham, the fresh prawns, the sweet and crispy winter bamboo shoots, the taste was distinct and unique. After swallowing, it turned into a warm current that spread in his body, nourishing his flesh and blood. The tiredness from slaughtering pigs in the morning seemed to be reduced a lot, and the comfortable feeling made him want to close his eyes. Could it be that all the food in this restaurant has miraculous effects? Andrew suddenly opened his eyes and looked at the Yangju fried rice in front of him in surprise. If the Ruggiamo didn't give him a strong increase in strength, then the Yangju fried rice really did relieve his fatigue. It couldn't be an illusion. Andrew clenched his fists, and his eyes became brighter. Although the increase in strength wasn't much, he could still feel it. "What's wrong, Andrew?" Myers looked at Andrew strangely. It was really strange that he stopped after eating one mouthful and clenched his fists. "Didn't you feel it? After eating the Ruggiamo, my strength has increased." Andrew looked at the crowd, and then pointed at the Yangju fried rice in front of him. "And after eating this Yangju fried rice, I can even get rid of fatigue. It's amazing." "What?" Everyone was a little surprised. Although they felt something strange after eating the Ruggiamo, they couldn't figure out what had changed. They clenched their fists, and their eyes lit up. Their strength had indeed increased. Ding! The spoon hit the plate and made a soft sound. Bernice looked at the empty plate in front of her and licked her lips as if she hadn't had enough. Her face was filled with a happy smile. She looked up at everyone and said, "I think it's only a matter of time before the top 3 changes. This Yangju fried rice is the best food I've ever tasted in my life. In comparison, I prefer the Ruggiamo. The aroma of the meat overflows with satisfaction. But the Yeongju fried rice is also very delicious. Andrew said with a smile. He scooped another spoonful of Yeongju fried rice and continued to eat. It was indeed a pleasure to feel the fatigue disappear. Now I'm looking forward to this Yeongju fried rice, too, Miles said with a smile. The fried rice they ordered was served one after another. Soon, they were all immersed in the delicious taste of the Yeongju fried rice. Their expressions were different, but they all looked quite happy. Meg walked out of the kitchen with a packed Yeongju fried rice, and handed it to Vicenio, who had just finished 2 plates. Mr. Mac, your Yeongju fried rice is amazing. Vicenio's face was a little rosy. He gave Meg a thumbs up, and his face was full of excitement. Not to mention how delicious it was. After eating, he felt his whole body was full of strength. The folk recipes he usually ate didn't have such an effect, and those kinds of things were in waves. After the effect wore off, he felt even worse. But this Yeongju fried rice was amazing. The more he ate, the more spirited he felt. He could feel that his half-crippled body was slowly recovering under the nourishment, as if it was sprouting in spring. He saw the hope of regaining his former vigor. If he wasn't already full, he would have had another bowl of fried rice. Good luck, Meg said with a smile as he took the gold coin. Okay, I'll make that woman beg for mercy today. Vicenio walked out confidently with the Yeongju fried rice in one hand. Meg shook his head with a smile. This young man didn't have it easy. He hoped to see him again tonight. Mr. Mac, I'll confirm the location of little Amy's class tomorrow at noon. I'll tell you when you come over for dinner tonight, Crassus said to Meg after paying the bill. Okay, thank you. Meg nodded with a smile. After all, Crassus was Amy's master now. He deserved respect. After all, he almost became the master of the elf princess. He wondered what their expressions would be like when they found out that the disciple they fought so hard for was the daughter of the elf princess 20 years ago. Little Amy, goodbye, Crassus said to Amy. Goodbye, Master Halfbeard, Amy replied with a wave of her hand. Julian also paid the bill and left. It seems that Amy inherited her talent for magic perfectly from her mother. Should I teach her swordsmanship in the future? Meg thought to himself as he watched Crassus and Julian leave. This was a question worth considering. Although he couldn't pick up a heavy sword now, Meg had a lot of powerful swordsmanship and fighting skills in his head. We'll pay the bill here, Andrew said to Meg. A plate of Yeongju fried rice and a plate of Ruggiamo is 9 gold coins in total. Do you want to pay together, or do you want to pay by yourselves? Remi slid down from the high stool and extended her little hand to look at everyone. Her expression was very experienced, and she was already very familiar with it. Amy is just a cashier. We'll pay by ourselves. We always do that. Bernice took out 9 gold coins from her purse and put them in Amy's little hand. She patted Amy's head with a smile and said, "Next time I come, I'll bring you a floral apron." "Thank you, Auntie Floral Apron." Amy nodded happily. The others didn't have any objections. It was like this every time they had a meal together. They all paid and left. Boss Mag, you're a genius. Perhaps you'll be able to bring a new direction to the culinary world, Miles said with a serious expression as he passed by Mag. All the guests and visitors in the restaurant looked at Meg. They all agreed with Miles' comment. The food provided by Amy's was like a shooting star in the sky, bringing a completely subversive food experience. Chapter 155. The restaurant fell silent instantly. Everyone's eyes gradually lit up as they looked at Mag, who was wearing a serious expression. The word chef was such a simple and down-to-earth word. It was the most important thing in a restaurant. However, most restaurant owners like to be called boss instead of chef. Some had even forgotten their identity as chefs. They were more interested in the respect and enjoyment that others gave them. However, Meg, who made such delicious and magical food and opened such an outstanding and popular restaurant, humbly called himself a chef in front of the praises and compliments of his peers. His humble attitude made the visitors feel a little embarrassed. It also made the customers look at him with approval. Perhaps only someone like him who knows his place and what he should be doing can create such a refreshing dish. Miles looked at Mag with approval, and at the same time, he was praising Mag in his heart. Indeed, the younger generation would surpass the older generation in the future. Andrew and the others looked thoughtful. They nodded at Meg and walked out of the restaurant. All I did was change Stephen Chow's lines. Why do I feel like I've received so many admiration points and enlightened others? Meg raised his eyebrows. Feeling the encouraging and admiring gazes, he walked into the kitchen with a smile on his face. He felt an inexplicable sense of satisfaction. The visitors didn't ask about the recipe or the cooking method. They didn't even ask about the spices that they couldn't taste. This first group of visitors was quite professional. However, since they were all chefs, those who were good at thinking should learn something after eating the two dishes. Perhaps they could get some inspiration in cooking. Of course, Mag didn't need to worry about what they could learn. After all, he wasn't a dream teacher. His job was to cook for the customers in the restaurant. After washing the pot, he continued to cook the fried rice. Just based on Mr. Mac's attitude, I'm looking forward to the tofu pudding tonight. Me too. But seriously, do you want the tofu pudding tonight? Salty or sweet? At the table by the door, Andreas and Moxiuji were talking softly. Of course it's sweet, Andreas said matter-of-factly. After a pause, he asked, what about you? Salty. Moxiuji said with a complicated expression. Both of them fell into silence. It's okay, brother. We don't have to fight over this. Tonight, you eat your salty food, and I'll eat my sweet food. We can drink together later. Andreas' expression was also a little awkward. After all, Krasu and Urian had just fought over whether to eat savory tofu pudding or sweet tofu pudding in the morning. Who knew what would happen tonight when the tofu pudding officially went on sale? However, the two of them were childhood friends, and it was completely acceptable for them to have different tastes. They wouldn't fall out over a small bowl of tofu pudding. In the Aiden Square, Crassus slowly made his way toward the exit of the restaurant with his staff in hand. Brandley, who had just paid the bill, hurried to catch up with him. His expression was a little nervous, and he said respectfully, Master Crassus. Crassus stopped in his tracks and turned to look at Brandley with a confused expression. He glanced at the grey sword and shield insignia on Brandley's chest, and nodded as he said, So it's you from the Grey Temple. What do you want from me? Brandley faltered slightly upon hearing this. He was already in his 70s, and all of the young people in the Grey Temple would refer to him as senior, so he was rather taken aback by this sudden call. However, Crassus was already in his 20s. Back when he was still playing with mud, the legends of the battle between ice and fire had already spread across the continent, and he had also been learning magic from them during his youth. Even his master had been a fervent fan of Crassus in his youth. Unfortunately, his talent in melee magic was too poor, and he had switched to long-range magic after being brutally beaten by a knight in his youth. However, his passion for melee magic had never been extinguished, and that had influenced Brandley to some extent. Of course, Brandley was still learning long-range magic. Melee magic was something that only a few magic casters in Rodu's Magus Tower were proficient in. Crassus had never taken in a disciple before. This meant that the daughter of the owner of Amy's was the only one who had received Crassus' attention in the past century, and that was something that had shaken the entire magic world. After all, Crassus had been in poor health for years. Many sorcerers were worried that Crassus would fall like a meteor after he reached the peak of melee magic, and they would not be able to inherit his legacy. Furthermore, Julian, the Lord of Flames, had also taken in a disciple at the same time, and it was the same half-elf girl. This news was most likely going to shock the entire continent. All of the prodigies under the tutelage of famous magic casters were most likely going to be very nervous. The battle between ice and fire had been going on for close to 100 years, and both of them had taken in a half-elf girl as their disciple. No one knew what kind of little demon they were going to teach. She was going to reach the pinnacle of ice and fire magic, and she was going to be able to wield both melee and long-range magic. In a decade or two, there was most likely going to be no place on the Norland continent that she couldn't go to. The thought only flashed through Brandley's mind before he came to his senses. Crassus' face was completely expressionless, but he could sense a powerful aura emanating from him, and he turned to Crassus with an even more respectful expression as he said, "Greetings, Master Crassus, I am Brandley of the Grey Temple. Forgive me for calling you here, but I would like to extend a warm welcome to you on behalf of the Grey Temple. It was our fault for not being a good host, and I hope you won't take offense. It's all right. I didn't inform the Grey Temple of my arrival in Chaos City, and I even had a fight with that old geezer Julian this morning. Sorry for the inconvenience." Crassus turned to Brandley with a serious expression, and said, "Also, you were here this morning, right? Did you report to your superiors that you came in contact with me?" Chapter 156. Crassus pursed his lips with a hint of mockery in his eyes. "That's a nice way to put it. You don't want to hurt anyone, so why don't we just stop fighting?" An awkward smile appeared on Brandley's face. From the perspective of the Grey Temple, it was best not to engage in a battle of ice and fire in Chaos City. If a battle were to break out, then half of the Aiden Square would be destroyed, which would be a catastrophic outcome. "Don't worry, we won't fight for now. Besides, what happened this morning wasn't a battle between ice and fire, it was a battle between savory and sweet." Crassus looked at Brandley in an indifferent manner, and paused momentarily before continuing, "I have my own servants, so I don't need you to run errands for me. I'm planning to live in Chaos City, but since you're here today, why don't you take me to a magic room? It'd be best if it's a newer one." "Newer magic rooms? There are a few in the main hall of the Grey Temple that were built 2 years ago. You can use them if you want, Master Crassus," Brandley said with a smile. He really wanted to emphasize that his legs weren't crippled yet, but he swallowed those words in the end. Crassus clearly didn't want anyone from the Grey Temple to follow him, and he had to report his plans to live in Chaos City as soon as possible. After all, Julian was currently running a magic potion shop in the Aiden Square. If both of them lived in Chaos City, they were like 2 fireballs that could explode at any moment, and he had to be on his guard at all times. Crassus thought to himself for a moment before shaking his head. "I can't go to the main hall of the Grey Temple. It's too far away, and it'll be inconvenient for my child to travel back and forth to eat." Then, Brandley turned to Crassus with a hesitant expression. There were indeed many magic casters in Chaos City, but there weren't many magic rooms that belonged to the Grey Temple that could be used by Crassus. Furthermore, all of them were in the main hall of the Grey Temple. Who would have thought that Crassus wouldn't be able to use them? "I remember that there are magic classes in Chaos School, right? Why don't you ask them to give me a magic room to use for a while?" Crassus nodded after a brief moment of contemplation. "Well, I'm afraid Chaos School won't be able to." Brandley hesitated. Chaos School was independent from the Grey Temple. Even though some magic casters from the Grey Temple worked at Chaos School, even he didn't have the right to ask Chaos School to give Crassus a magic room. This matter would have to be reported to the Round Table's meeting's decision. After all, it would have to be. That would have to make the final decision. He's not going to go to the main hall of the Greyofs of the Greyess of Swords. His of course, Crassus of course, but he of course, Crassus of course, and of SSSRS. Let's go. You just have to bring me to the principal. I'll take care of the rest myself. He knows Principal Novan? Brandley's eyes widened with incredulity as he stared at Crassus' departing figure. Novan was the only 10th-tier magic caster in Chaos City, as well as the most powerful magic caster in the city. His position as principal was the main reason why Chaos School was able to remain independent of the Grey Temple. Even the Temple Lord and the City Lord had to give him some leeway due to his eccentric personality. After all, he never smiled at others like he did when he was with children. Every time he went to Chaos School after the Round Table Conference, the lot drawing ceremony would be no different from choosing a suicide squad. If it's a blessing, it's not a curse. If it's a curse, it can't be avoided. Who cares? Let's just die. Even though he was panicking internally, Brandley gritted his teeth at the sight of Crassus' receding figure, and hurriedly followed after him. What kind of sin had he committed to make an old man like him suffer like this? Even when he was young, he didn't dare to do something so thrilling. In the restaurant, Meg finally heaved a sigh of relief after seeing off the last customer. He twisted his wrists and shoulders, which were a little numb from cooking for so long, and looked at the 80-something new mission in his mind. At this rate, it would only take him 2 or 3 days to complete this new mission, and a smile appeared on his face. "Thank you for your hard work, Father. Let me give you a massage." Amy trotted over to Meg with a sympathetic expression. She stood on her tiptoes and tried to massage Meg's shoulders, but she was too short, and her hands were too weak, so her little fists were like tickles to his back. However, Meg's heart was filled with warmth at the sight of Amy's earnest expression. In this world, only his precious daughter would care about him. Boss, do you need me to massage your shoulders for you?" I'm a little stronger." Yarbemia made her way over to him, and her hands were clasped together nervously behind her back. Her cheeks were also a little flushed as she thought of something. "Oh, Mia, you know how to massage as well?" Meg turned around to look at Yarbemia in surprise. "Sigh." Amy retracted her little hands and gasped for breath. She was tired after just massaging for a while, so she looked at Yarbemia and pleaded, "Sister Mia, why don't you massage Father? I think I'm too weak. I used to massage my mother when I was young, because she would squat and wash dishes for almost the entire day when she was working. She couldn't even straighten her back when she came home." Yarbemia nodded. When she mentioned her mother, her eyes became misty. "Okay, Mia, I'll leave it to you." Meg smiled as he leaned back comfortably in his chair and closed his eyes. He didn't try to comfort her, but after a pause, he added, "But don't break my bones." PFFF Yarbemia, who was still a little nervous, suddenly burst into laughter. She shook her head and said seriously, "I won't. Don't worry, boss, I'll control my strength." "Then I'm relieved." Meg nodded with a smile. Yarbemia walked behind Meg and looked at Meg, who had closed his eyes. She raised her hand and hesitated for a moment before gently placing it on Meg's shoulder. Her face became even redder, and her calloused hands were trembling. She seemed very nervous. "I'm going to sleep for a while. You can do whatever you want," Meg said with a slight smile. His breathing gradually calmed down, and he seemed to have fallen asleep in an instant. "Oh, okay." Yarbemia hurriedly nodded. Her nervousness instantly disappeared by half. She took a few deep breaths and placed her hands on Meg's shoulders. She gently massaged from his neck to his shoulders, and then to his arms. She gradually increased the strength of her hands. Meg felt a pair of skillful hands moving between his shoulders and neck. The strength of her hands was just right, and her technique was very good. It was so comfortable that he almost cried out. Chapter 157. Yarbemia's massage technique was really good. Her control of strength was good, and her strength was much greater than the average female masseuse's. The tiredness accumulated in the morning gradually disappeared, and Meg, who was only pretending to be asleep, fell asleep soon after. When he woke up, Meg slowly opened his eyes and looked at the clock on the wall. It was already 2:30 in the afternoon. He was covered with a thin blanket. Amy was sleeping on the opposite side of the table, and Ugly Duckling was sleeping comfortably on her lap. She really fell asleep. Meg shook his head with a smile. He gently moved the chair aside, stood up, and stretched. He felt refreshed and comfortable from head to toe. The sound of bowls and chopsticks clattering came from the kitchen. The dining room had been cleaned. The floor was so clean that it could reflect one's reflection. Also, a dry towel was used to wipe the floor clean. Looks like Yarbemia is almost done with her work. Meg casually put the blanket on the chair and walked to the kitchen. It would be a waste of resources if I don't make good use of this employee who is so good at massaging. Although Yangju fried rice was very good at relieving fatigue, he couldn't eat it all day long. When he was tired, he could ask her to massage his shoulders and arms. The relaxation effect was just as good as eating a plate of Yangju fried rice. "Mia, there's a small part-time job that you want to do now. The pay isn't too high. It's just a meal for dinner. The quota is the same as lunch, 600 copper coins." Meg walked to the door and smiled at Yarbemia, who was carefully taking the bowls out of the dishwasher and putting them in the cupboard. You're awake. Yarbemia heard the voice and immediately turned around. When she heard Meg's words, she was stunned. The food in the dining room made her feel like she had found happiness in life. She was already very grateful to be able to eat lunch for 600 copper coins a day. After all, with her salary, she couldn't even eat more than a few bowls of Yangju fried rice. But now, Meg said he would give her a quota of 600 copper coins for dinner. Just tell me what you need me to do. You don't need to increase my salary. I think I still have a lot of free time in my current job. The salary is already very high. Yarbemia looked at Meg and shook her head. Although she wanted to eat some delicious food tonight, she still shook her head. That won't do. The previous job scope didn't include this. Now that it's added, of course, the benefits have to be added. Meg smiled and shook his head. MIA was good at everything, but she was too kind and easily contented. In fact, in addition to the massage, Meg was also quite satisfied with her performance these days. Every evening, when he saw her go out to buy a few pancakes to satisfy her hunger and come in after eating, he felt a little sorry for this girl. An employee like her who could do the work of 3 people was worth having another meal for. But Yarbemia still wanted to say something. Then it's settled. But it's not certain if you're willing to do this. Meg directly interrupted her. Looking at her confused eyes, he smiled and said, "Actually, it's not a big deal. It's just that I'm too busy with the restaurant and my body can't take it. If it's possible, I'd like to ask you to massage my shoulders and arms after closing time to relax." Yarbemia originally thought that Meg wanted her to help in the kitchen. She didn't expect that Meg wanted a massage. She hurriedly shook her head and said, "Boss, I can't do that. If you like it, I can give you a massage in the future when you're tired. It's not something difficult and time-consuming. How can I pay you more? Then I'll take it that you agree. Let's start tonight." Meg smiled. After a pause, he looked at Yarbemia and said, "There's sweet tofu pudding tonight." Gulp. Thinking of the delicious savory tofu pudding in the morning, Yarbemia subconsciously swallowed her saliva. Looking at Meg's gentle and sincere eyes, she hesitated for a moment. Then, her eyes gradually became resolute. She stood up straight and nodded vigorously. With a solemn expression, she said, "Thank you, boss. I'll work hard and give you a good massage." She was full of energy again. Very good. This is the state you should be in. Meg was very satisfied with Yarbemia's energetic state. She brought a youthful vitality to the restaurant. Seeing that the dishes and chopsticks had been washed and the kitchen was cleaned, he nodded and said, "Take a rest. When Yarbemia wakes up, you can dance with her. Boss, let me help in the kitchen." Although MIA is very stupid, MIA can learn. MIA looked at Meg and pleaded. For the past few days, Meg had been working hard in the kitchen while she rested outside. This made her feel a little embarrassed. She felt that she had taken advantage of him. Now that she could eat in the restaurant again, she felt that she should work harder. Host, this system solemnly warns that the host is not allowed to teach the culinary skills learned from the system to others. Otherwise, the host will be punished with a deduction of 0.5 strength points every time. At this moment, the system's somewhat stern voice sounded, with a hint of unquestionable meaning. "System, are you trying to tire me to death?" Meg raised his eyebrows. Originally, he was a little tempted by Yarbemia's words. If there was someone to help prepare the ingredients, the efficiency would definitely be increased. However, before he could say anything, the system had already blocked this path. The host's culinary skills are only at the level of a novice. You have only mastered 3 dishes. You are not fit to be a teacher. The system's calm voice sounded. From what you're saying, there are different levels of chefs. My level is at least at the level of a novice chef, right? I'm actually still a novice. Meg raised his eyebrows. No matter what, he had made Rujiamo and Yangju fried rice that had made people in this world go crazy. The tofu pudding that he had just made had directly caused the first battle between the savory and the sweet dishes in this world. A battle between 10th-tier magicians was not something that could be easily seen. Yet, the system had actually rated him as a novice. After a pause, Meg figured out some other meaning from the system's words. He frowned and said, "Also, from what you're saying, when I learn more dishes in the future, I'll be fit to be a teacher and be able to teach others how to cook." The host's level of authority is not high enough to know the answer to the question. Raise the restaurant level to level 2 to unlock the right to ask questions. The system's voice sounded. Meg's eyelids twitched. In order to raise his level, the system was really ruthless. Calmly, he said, "Forget it, I don't want to know. I don't need your help for now. I can handle it. You just have to play with Amy for a while." Meg couldn't afford to have his strength deducted. The system had made it sound so absolute that there was no room for discussion. Furthermore, kneading dough and making tofu pudding required skills. He had a max-level experience bag in his head, and he had only succeeded after studying for so long in the test field for the god of cookery. If he let Yarbemia learn it now, it would only make things worse. "All right. If you need my help, please call me." Yarbemia nodded vigorously. She had already understood Meg's character over the past few days. He was a man of his word. She didn't continue to insist and walked out of the kitchen. Meg picked up the apron beside him and put it on. The tofu pudding was going to be sold at night, so he had to prepare more ingredients. Chapter 158. Meg's body froze. He didn't expect the system to suddenly issue a new mission, and the new mission was to limit the purchase of tofu pudding. Wasn't this system crazy about money? The system would receive 40 copper coins for each serving of tofu pudding sold. Logically speaking, it should be urging him to sell more tofu pudding, right? System, the restaurant has been open for so long. It's not good to limit the purchase of tofu pudding now, right? If the customers aren't satisfied with the food, then it's not good for the restaurant's reputation. Being able to eat your fill is now a specialty of the restaurant. Meg frowned. After thinking for a moment, he asked curiously, "Also, what the hell is that God of Cookery promotion lottery?" The God of Cookery promotion lottery is a system that the system came up with after careful consideration to increase the host's enthusiasm for the promotion. It can also be called the God of Cookery's wheel. After the host completes the designated mission, there is a chance to draw the method of making exquisite pastries, making ice cream, brewing high-end drinks, physical strength points, and other prizes. The prizes are generous, and it's guaranteed that you'll win, the system said excitedly. Ice cream, high-end drinks, physical strength points. Meg's eyes slowly lit up. Amy would definitely like ice cream. Not many children could resist such a taste. As for the high-end drinks, he was a little tempted. Although he wasn't addicted to alcohol, drinking a glass of red wine before bed was quite a leisurely life. Of course, what made him most excited was that the system had finally added a physical strength point to the mission reward. In a few days, he would be able to accumulate 10,000 points and buy the first set of physical strength points. This was a crucial step for him to restore his physical strength to a normal person's physique. If he could obtain 0.5 physical strength from this mission, then he would enter a whole new level. He would be able to pick up a sword, and with the sword techniques and skills in his mind, he would be able to protect himself a little. The reward is barely enough. Meg's face was calm. He changed the topic and said, "But system, let's talk about the purchase limit first. Why don't we change the mission? For example, selling 1,000 servings of tofu pudding or something?" As a supervisor, this system has the obligation to remind the host when he walks into the wrong direction. The system will not interfere with the first 2 dishes, but it will promote a virtuous cycle for the restaurant by limiting the purchase of certain items. Let more customers taste the delicacies and return with enjoyment instead of waiting in line for a long time and seeing others return with 3 to 5 servings in their hands. This will hurt the customers even more. It added, the restaurant's popularity has spread to a certain extent. The quantity task will not be released in the short term. Hearing that, Meg fell into silence. He had actually discovered the problem mentioned by the system in the past 2 days. Yangju fried rice could be served during business hours, but it took a while for the dishes to be served. But Rugiamo's were different. Due to the limited supply of ingredients, they were usually sold out in the middle of the opening hours. Many customers left in the line could only leave in disappointment. There was a customer who couldn't come to line up in advance because of work, and he didn't get to eat after waiting in line for 3 days. Mag even wanted to save one for him when he saw that disappointed look in his eyes. He felt a little apologetic as he watched him leave. As the system had said, if the purchase of Ruggiamo's was limited to 1 per customer, the total number of customers in the restaurant would be about 300. The 200 Ruggiamo's he had prepared would be enough for everyone who wanted to buy one. But Ruggiamo's were the staple food. 4 big eaters like Harrison and Sargeras, 1 Ruggiamo was not enough at all. Limiting the purchase of Ruggiamo's was more torturous than not being able to eat at all. These soybeans come from the white soil in the depths of the Orcs Twilight Forest, and they're rich in protein. There's only 1 piece of land on the entire Norland continent that has such a unique landscape and soil that has yet to be discovered and developed. I've set up an advanced plantation there. The soybeans grown here are exposed to sunlight for up to 14 hours a day. Nano-robots remove pests, and they are grown naturally. They have fully absorbed the nutrients of the white soil. The protein content of these soybeans is 5 times that of ordinary soybeans. They are rich in vitamins and minerals. They have an immediate beautifying effect, and the long-term effects will be even better. The system's voice paused, and then it changed its tone. That's why, if you eat too much, it will be too much of a burden on your body, and you may not be able to digest it completely. So you're saying that 1 bowl of tofu pudding made from these soybeans is better than 5 bowls? Meg was a little surprised. In terms of protein content and quality, it is about 4.5 bowls, the system said seriously. Little Amy and Ugly Duckling had 2 bowls in the morning. Are they already over the limit? Mag asked anxiously. 2 servings per meal is within the acceptable range. Also, they are in the developing stage, so they need more protein, so you don't have to worry about their safety, the system said. Meg heaved a sigh of relief upon hearing that. Luckily, the system was reliable. He thought for a moment, and then asked, by the way, system, I should be able to buy the first strength point the day after tomorrow. How much is the next one? 50,000 gold coins, the system replied calmly. 5. System, you're fucking robbing me. Meg was furious. He had saved 10,000 gold coins for half a month, and 50,000 gold coins was a huge sum. According to the restaurant's current income, even if he didn't have any extra expenses, it would take him more than a month to afford it. Of course, what made Meg more concerned was that the price had suddenly increased by 5 times. If the second portion was sold for 50,000 gold coins, then wouldn't the third and fourth portions be sold for 100,000 or even 200,000 gold coins? Although the restaurant's current income was good, if this was the case, Meg's plan to buy strength points directly with money wouldn't be able to make much progress in the short term. The system doesn't recommend the host to buy strength points directly. Please take your identity as a candidate for the God of Cookery seriously and efficiently complete the mission issued by the system. In the process of completing the mission, there is a high chance that you will be rewarded with strength points. This is the normal way to obtain strength points, the system said seriously. You really think so? Meg was a little skeptical. If the host insists on buying, the system will reluctantly sell it out of humanitarian consideration. However, in principle, the system still insists that the system should work hard to complete the mission, the system said seriously. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.